Hello, curious minds, and welcome to Documentary for Sleep. Tonight's story is not about fantasy, but about science. Gentle science. We'll explore one of the simplest yet deepest questions. Why does it take humans so long to grow up compared to so many other animals? While a foal can run within hours, and a chimp can climb with ease after months, we spend more than a decade in childhood. What might that say about our species? We don't have all the answers, but we do have the bones, the brains, and the theories. And if at any point you drift off mid-chapter, that's perfectly fine. Sleep is part of the journey here. I've placed full timestamps in the description so you can return to exactly where you left off tomorrow, because this story, like all human stories, is worth hearing in full. If you enjoy this kind of quiet, long-form storytelling, if it helps you learn, focus, or simply relax at the end of a noisy day, consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps our little community of curious sapiens grow. And if you feel like sharing, tell us. Do you listen while resting, during a night shift, or somewhere far from home? It's always a joy to see where this gentle circle of listeners reaches. And as always, stay curious, stay calm. Imagine a human infant abandoned in the wilderness. It cannot crawl, cannot stand, cannot cry for its mother with any hope of being heard. Its survival is an impossibility, a fleeting breath against the immense, indifferent machinery of nature. Now, picture a newborn horse staggering to its feet within minutes of birth, its legs wobbly but functional, a testament to readiness. Why this profound discrepancy? Why is our species, for all its eventual dominion, ushered into the world in a state of such utter helplessness? This vulnerability is not an error in our design. It is, in fact, the very cornerstone of our success. We are a species defined by what scientists call obligate secondary altriciality, a technical term for a profound biological compromise. The human brain, that magnificent organ of reason and imagination, grew so large over millennia that it created a problem. To accommodate its size at full term, the female pelvis would need to be impossibly wide, making the act of walking upright, another key evolutionary triumph, mechanically unfeasible. So, nature found a solution. Birth us early. We are ejected into the world while our brains are still only a quarter of their eventual size, our skulls composed of soft, unfused plates that allow for the dramatic expansion that will follow. Our greatest strength necessitated our most profound weakness. The cradle of our intelligence is the narrow gateway of the maternal pelvis. The archaeological record whispers the echoes of this ancient bargain. Compared to the skulls of other primates, the human infant's skull exhibits a uniquely rapid rate of postnatal growth. This is not a brief period of dependency, but a long, drawn-out investment. Evidence from our ancestor, Homo erectus, suggests patterns of extended childcare stretching over years. This was not merely about protection from predators. It was about the slow, deliberate wiring of a complex brain. The helpless infant, constantly held, fed, and spoken to, becomes a sponge for social cues, language, and technique. Its weakness is the vacuum into which culture flows. The long childhood is the price and the prize for a mind capable of shaping the world. In our modern societies, this period of dependency has stretched to an unprecedented length. A child requires more than a decade to achieve basic independence, years spent in a state of learning that far surpasses the instinctual programming of other creatures. This is the grand strategy hidden within the apparent flaw. The initial state of incompetence is the prerequisite for ultimate competence. The brain's plasticity, its ability to be molded by experience, is maximized precisely because it is not preloaded with rigid instincts. We are born unfinished so that we may become anything. So, is this initial fragility a failure of evolution, a design flaw we have simply learned to work around? Or is it evolution's most brilliant gambit? By forcing us into the world as vulnerable apprentices, evolution traded self-sufficiency for limitless potential. It swapped the certainty of instinct for the uncertainty of learning. The infant's helpless hand, unable even to grasp a branch, would one day learn to hold a tool, to write a symphony, to chart the stars. But this trade-off came with its own, deeper consequence. If the price of a big brain is a premature birth, what happens when that brain grows too large for its own good? The very feature that allowed our survival now shapes the fundamental tension of our existence. The infant's head, a vessel of such promise, is almost too big for the journey. This is the legacy of two competing evolutionary forces, an expanding brain and a constricting pelvis. Our upright gait, which freed our hands and allowed us to survey the horizons, came with anatomical tax. The pelvis narrowed and reshaped itself for efficient bipedal locomotion, tightening the exit. Meanwhile, the brain, the engine of our cognition, continued its inexorable growth. The result is a biological tightrope walk, a birth process that is, by mammalian standards, a perilous and narrow passage. The skull plates slide over one another in a temporary deformation, a momentary 2OC to navigate the bottleneck. It is a dramatic, risky entry into the world. This physical constraint is more than an obstetrical fact. It is a powerful metaphor. It speaks of the constant negotiation within us, the push and pull between different aspects of our nature. The body that strives for efficient, stable movement must accommodate the mind that yearns for boundless expansion. We are, in our very structure, a compromise between the terrestrial and the cerebral. The narrow pelvis grounds us, literally, to the earth, while the expansive brain dreams of escaping it. Is this physical bottleneck at the moment of birth merely a one-time event, or is it a theme that repeats throughout a human life, a constant struggle between the container and the contained, between the limits of our form and the boundlessness of our thought? If you have ever witnessed a human birth, you understand. It is a primal struggle, a rite of passage etched in effort and risk. It stands in stark contrast to the relative ease observed in much of the animal kingdom. Why is this fundamental act of continuation for our species so uniquely perilous and painful? The answer is written in the paradoxical architecture of our bodies, a story of two competing evolutionary masterpieces, the brain and the pelvis. The human brain is our crowning glory, a universe of synapses contained within a bony vault. It is, on average, 3 times larger than the brain of our closest primate relatives. This expansion was the engine of our ascent, granting us language, art, and the ability to ponder our own existence. But this magnificent organ comes with a formidable logistical problem at the moment of birth. The very gateway to the world, the female pelvis, could not expand indefinitely to accommodate it. The constraint was set in stone, or rather in bone, by another defining human trait, our upright posture. To walk efficiently on 2 legs, the pelvis had to remodel itself into a stable, bowl-shaped basin, a support structure that necessarily narrowed the birth canal. We were caught in an evolutionary tug-of-war, a brain demanding more space, and a pelvis constrained by the necessities of bipedal locomotion. The fossil record tells a silent, dramatic story of this compromise, examining the pelvic bones of our hominin ancestors, from Australopithecus to Homo erectus, reveals a gradual, inexorable squeeze. As cranial capacity swelled across millennia, the birth canal grew tighter, more twisting. This created an evolutionary pressure cooker with a startling solution: birth the offspring earlier. Faced with an impossible choice between a fully developed, large-brained baby and a mother capable of walking, evolution chose a third path. It began to expel the young at an increasingly premature stage of development. Where other animals are born ready to walk or forage within days or hours, human infants arrive astonishingly unfinished, their skulls still soft and malleable, their systems reliant on constant care. The intense pain and danger of human childbirth is, in a biological sense, the price tag for our cognitive potential. We pay in risk and agony for the capacity to learn, to adapt, to imagine. This leads to a profound social and psychological consequence. Because we are born so neurologically incomplete, a vast portion of our brain development must happen outside the womb. in the rich and unpredictable theater of the social world. Our childhoods are elongated, our dependence on family and community absolute. The very structures of human culture, the extended families, the shared knowledge, the nurturing bonds, may be a direct, necessary response to our biological predicament. Our big brains destined us not for independence at birth, but for profound interdependence. One might ask, why didn't evolution simply choose an easier path? Why not select for smaller heads and simpler births? But that question misses the point of the trade-off itself. A smaller brain might have made birth safer, but it would have extinguished the very spark of curiosity that allows us to even ask the question, would a creature with a simpler mind, devoid of the relentless drive to understand, still be what we call human? Our painful entry into the world is not a design flaw. It is the first signature on a contract between biology and consciousness. It is evidence that our intellect and our bodies are not separate entities but partners in a delicate, costly negotiation. And this negotiation, this fundamental compromise etched into our skeleton, was only the beginning. For the narrow pelvis that made birth a trial was itself a consequence of an earlier, even more transformative evolutionary gamble. What was the original decision that set this entire chain of events in motion, forcing the brain and the pelvis into their tense alliance? The answer lies in the very way we stand, in the ground we walk upon, and in the price we paid to rise from all fours and see the horizon. Have you ever felt that dull, persistent ache in the small of your back after a long day? It's a universal human complaint, so common we rarely question its origin. But what if that pain is a whisper from our deep past, an ancient invoice for a revolutionary adaptation? The price of standing upright, it turns out, extends far beyond a sore back, reaching into the most fundamental and dangerous of human experiences, the act of giving birth. The biological trade-off is both elegant and brutal. When our ancestors rose from all fours, the entire architecture of the skeleton had to reconfigure. The spine curved into an S shape to act as a shock absorber, a marvel of engineering for a bipedal gait. But this new posture demanded a narrower pelvis, a tightened basin of bone to anchor the muscles and maintain balance. This crucial shift for stability came with a severe consequence. The birth canal, the passage through this bony cradle, was squeezed and constricted. For our primate cousins who walk on four limbs, childbirth is a relatively straightforward affair. Their wider, more open pelvises allow for a less obstructed journey. For us, it became a tightrope walk between two evolutionary imperatives: the need for efficient bipedal locomotion and the need to successfully pass a large-brained infant into the world. This evolutionary compromise is etched into fossilized bone. Consider Australopithecus afarensis, like the famous Lucy, walking the earth over 3 million years ago. Her skeleton tells a story of a body caught between two worlds. The structure of her knees and the curve of her spine clearly indicate she walked upright, a pioneer of a new way of moving. Yet reconstructions of her pelvis reveal a shape that was already beginning to foreshadow the obstetric dilemma of later humans. It was a design in transition, a physical manifestation of an unresolved conflict. Was she, in her time, already experiencing the first pangs of a challenge that would define our species? Her bones offer no record of childbirth, only the silent, stubborn architecture of a trade-off in progress. We, Homo sapiens, are the inheritors of this unfinished blueprint. The consequences are woven into the fabric of our lives. Chronic back pain, slipped discs, and sciatica are the modern echoes of a spine still adapting to its vertical role. And childbirth, for much of human history, became a perilous gauntlet, a leading cause of death for women and infants. In a stark evolutionary response, nature found a grim solution. Human babies are born remarkably premature compared to other animals. To wait until their brains and skulls were fully developed would make birth impossible. So, they are ejected into the world while their heads are still soft and malleable, and their bodies are utterly helpless. What we call a newborn is, in a biological sense, a fetus that has simply changed its address. This biological necessity, this forced early birth, triggered a cascade of consequences far beyond the delivery room. It created what we now know as an extended childhood. A human infant requires more than a decade of constant care, protection, and teaching to achieve basic independence, double or triple the time needed by most other mammals. This is not a design flaw, but rather a direct, if unintended, side effect of our upright stance. The helplessness of our young demanded a new kind of social structure. It required stable, cooperative groups where parents, and often extended kin, could invest immense time and energy into a single offspring. The demanding infant, born too soon because of a narrow pelvis, became the catalyst for the bonds of family, the sharing of knowledge, and the very foundations of community. So, can we truly call the shift to bipedalism an upgrade? Or did we simply exchange one set of constraints for another, trading the freedom of a quadruped for the back pain and birth trauma of a biped, all while shackling ourselves to the prolonged, energy-intensive task of raising our underdeveloped young? The ache in your back is a small reminder of that choice, and the profound, vulnerable dependency of a human child is its most significant, society-forging consequence. But if a narrow pelvis forced our babies into the world early and helpless, demanding a childhood stretched thin and long, one must wonder, was this extended period of vulnerability a mere biological burden, or did it secretly become the very cradle of our humanity? A newborn monkey, its limbs still trembling with the novelty of gravity, will cling to its mother's fur. Within months, it will be scrambling up branches, plucking fruit, navigating the complex vertical world of the canopy with an instinctual grace. Its childhood is a brief, intense tutorial before the software is fully installed and it is launched into independence. Now, observe a human infant. For years, it is a creature of profound helplessness. It cannot roll over, cannot grasp, cannot utter a word to express its most basic needs. It will take more than a decade before it can be trusted to cross a street alone. Placed side by side, the comparison seems almost absurd. In the ruthless ledger of survival, this prolonged vulnerability looks like a catastrophic design flaw. What went wrong? The answer is written not in error, but in the very architecture of our brains. Unlike other primates whose brains are largely pre-wired at birth, a human infant arrives in the world with a mind astonishingly unfinished. For at least the first 5 years of life, the brain is not a completed cathedral, but a frenetic, chaotic construction site. Billions of neurons are forging connections at a dizzying rate, a storm of synaptic formation known as the exuberant period. This neuroplasticity is a double-edged sword. It is the biological opportunity for immense adaptation, a chance for the brain to be sculpted not just by genes but by experience, by culture, by the specific social environment into which the child is born. The brain is soft clay, waiting to be imprinted with the language, the gestures, the unspoken rules of its tribe. But this magnificent adaptability comes at a steep price, a period of dependency that stretches far beyond that of any other animal. The cradle of our potential is also a cage of need. This trade-off is not a recent development. The fossil record whispers tales of this extended childhood. Among the remains of early Homo sapiens, we find evidence that our ancestors were not solitary creatures struggling alone. The prolonged need of an infant demanded a solution that transcended the mother-offspring bond. It required a village. Grandparents, their own reproductive years behind them, emerged as crucial repositories of knowledge and care, allowing younger adults to forage and hunt. The community became the nursery. The sharing of food and resources was not merely an act of kindness. It was a survival strategy forged in the fires of necessity. The helpless infant, in its profound need, became the invisible architect of human social structure, weaving the first fragile threads of cooperation and collective responsibility that would eventually bind us into civilizations. Was it our intelligence that allowed for this extended childhood, or was it the extended childhood and the social bonds it forced upon us that forged our intelligence? In the modern world, this biological legacy has been stretched to its logical extreme. A Child today requires not just years, but decades to absorb the staggering complexity of human culture. Language, mathematics, social norms, abstract reasoning, these are not instincts that bloom overnight. They are intricate tapestries woven slowly, thread by thread, through years of play, instruction, and observation. What was once a period of simple physical dependency has evolved into a marathon of cognitive apprenticeship. This slow growing is no longer a mere disadvantage to be endured. It has been revealed as our species' central evolutionary strategy. The prolonged childhood is the necessary incubation period for a mind capable of contemplating the stars, composing symphonies, and building machines that can think. The very slowness we might lament is the fertile ground in which our deepest understanding takes root. But if this delay is so advantageous, why does it feel so inconvenient, so fraught with anxiety for both the child and the society that must support it? This tension points to a deeper paradox. The extended childhood is a biological reality, but its meaning is shaped by the culture it inhabits. In a world that prizes speed and efficiency, the slow, meandering path of a child's development can seem like an aberration. We rush to fill the time with structured learning, anxious to optimize every moment, perhaps forgetting that the brain's most profound work often happens in the quiet spaces of boredom and unstructured play. The system groans under the weight of supporting this long journey to adulthood. So, we must ask, if this prolonged immaturity is our greatest strength, why does it so often feel like our greatest burden? Is the friction we experience simply the cost of complexity? Or is it a sign that we have misunderstood the purpose of this extended twilight between infancy and independence? Perhaps we have been looking at it backwards. The long childhood is not a flaw to be corrected or a problem to be solved. It is a gift of time, a blank page. It is the space where we learn not just what to think, but how to be. It is where we practice empathy in the sandbox, negotiate fairness over toys, and first glimpse the intricate dance of social connection. It is the period where the self is not yet fixed, where possibilities are still infinite. The unfinished brain is not a weakness. It is a portal to becoming. But if this period of dependency is the crucible of humanity, then what is forged within it? What alchemy transforms biological necessity into the bonds that hold us together? For the child's desperate need does not exist in a vacuum. It creates a gravitational pull that draws others into its orbit. A mother cannot do it alone. She needs a partner, a family, a community. This simple, unavoidable fact turned a biological liability into our most potent survival weapon: social connection. The infant's brain, in its glorious incompleteness, is designed to be shaped by others. It seeks the human face, calms to the human voice, learns the map of emotions from the expressions of its caregivers. Its survival depends on its ability to connect, and our survival depends on our willingness to respond. The relationship is symbiotic. We build the child's brain, and in doing so, we rebuild our own social world, reinforcing the ties that make us human. The child's cry is not just a signal of distress, it is the foundational call that builds the tribe. But is this bond merely a practical arrangement for survival, or does it hint at something more profound about the nature of our consciousness? Could it be that our sense of self is, from the very beginning, a collaborative creation? Of all the creatures to walk the earth, none begin their journey in a state of such profound vulnerability as the human infant. A newborn foal can stumble to its feet within an hour, its instincts a pre-written map for survival. A sea turtle hatchling, driven by an ancient compass in its mind, scrambles from the sand to the sea without a single lesson. But a human child? It arrives into the world unfinished, a being of soft bones and unformed potential, utterly dependent on the care of others for not just days or months, but for over a decade. In the ruthless arithmetic of evolution, this should be a fatal flaw. A creature that requires such an enormous investment of time and energy, a long-term gamble with no guarantee of return, seems destined for extinction. Yet this apparent liability, this evolutionary disadvantage, became the very catalyst that propelled a fragile primate to dominance. How did a strategy of profound weakness transform into the ultimate strength? The answer is written not in stone or gene alone, but in the delicate, invisible threads woven in the extended twilight of human childhood. Biologists have a term for our kind of beginning: altricial. It means to be born in an immature state, requiring extensive parental care. Unlike precocial species, which hit the ground running, human infants are born with their development dramatically truncated. Their skulls are not yet fused, their vision is a blur, their motor skills non-existent. This biological reality is a compromise, a consequence of the evolutionary arms race between a large brain and the narrow constraints of the bipedal pelvis. To walk upright, the birth canal could not widen indefinitely. To grow smarter, the brain had to expand. The solution was to evict the fetus early, to let the final, most crucial stages of neural wiring occur in the outside world. This biological necessity created a powerful, non-negotiable demand: protection. A helpless infant cannot be left alone. Its survival hinges on a bond, a promise of unwavering attention from at least one other person. This dependency, far from being a mere burden, forged the first and most critical social contract. The need to care for the weak became the cradle of community. Was it, then, our weakness that first taught us how to love? The archaeological record offers silent, poignant testimony to this revolution in caring. Among the scattered bones and hearth ashes of early Homo sapiens, we find evidence that defies the typical pattern of the animal kingdom. We find the remains of the old, individuals who lived long past their prime reproductive years, their bodies showing signs of infirmity that would have been a death sentence in any other species. A healed, broken femur, the evidence of care during a prolonged illness. These are not just medical facts, they are the fossils of empathy. They speak of a society where knowledge and support flowed across generations. The presence of grandparents, of aunts, and uncles created a web of support that allowed for the unprecedented luxury of a long childhood. This was not a nuclear family struggling in isolation. It was a tribe, a network. The child was not raised by a mother alone, but by a collective. This extended apprenticeship under the watchful eyes of multiple caregivers freed the parents to hunt and gather, and more importantly, it exposed the child to a richer tapestry of human experience. The long childhood, therefore, was not just permitted by society, it demanded society into existence. Could the very concept of a tribe have been born from the simple, incessant needs of a crying infant? This intricate social dance, choreographed around the needs of the young, laid the foundation for what we now recognize as the core of human psychology: attachment. The emotional bond between a child and its caregiver is not a sentimental luxury. It is the fundamental substrate upon which our humanity is built. It is in the safe harbor of a consistent, responsive relationship that a child learns its first lessons in trust. The caregiver's face is the first mirror in which the infant sees its own emotions reflected and understood. From this secure base, the child ventures forth to explore the world, its curiosity fueled by the knowledge that a safe retreat awaits. This dynamic is the prototype for all future relationships. It teaches reciprocity, the reading of subtle social cues, and the management of complex emotions like fear, joy, and frustration. The skills honed in the nursery, empathy, cooperation, communication, are the very skills that would later enable humans to build cities, negotiate treaties, and create symphonies. The playground, with its sharing and squabbles, its alliances and betrayals, is a training ground for the complexities of adult society. Is our capacity for culture, for law, for art, ultimately an elaborate extension of the lessons learned at our mother's knee? We live in a world that often celebrates premature independence, that mistakes early self-sufficiency for strength. We admire the creature that stands alone. But what becomes of an intelligence that is never allowed to be dependent? Consider a thought experiment. A human child, through some impossible means, granted the physical autonomy of a precocial animal from birth. It feeds itself. It moves with purpose. It requires no comforting embrace in the night. Would this paragon of early independence ever develop a theory of mind? Would it understand irony or feel the pang of nostalgia? Could it comprehend the self-sacrifice of a hero or the subtle pain of a bittersweet memory? Its brain, while biologically human, would be wired in isolation. It might solve puzzles, but it would likely never yearn for connection, never feel the profound ache of loneliness that is the flip side of love. Its intelligence would be a sterile, computational thing, devoid of the rich, messy, emotional context that gives human thought its depth and meaning. Does true wisdom, then, require a period of acknowledged weakness, a debt to others that can never be fully repaid? The child's helplessness is a silent, powerful teacher. It forces the adult to transcend mere self-interest. To answer a cry in the dark is to practice empathy. To feed a hungry mouth is to enact sacrifice. To patiently guide small, clumsy hands is to invest in a future one may not live to see. In the demanding presence of the infant, the adult is compelled to become more patient, more protective, more human. The vulnerability of the young sculpted the compassion of the old. This dynamic did not merely ensure survival, it initiated a new kind of evolutionary process, a cultural one. The long childhood became a protected space, a sanctuary of learning where each new generation could absorb the accumulated knowledge, stories, and mistakes of those who came before. It allowed for the transmission of more than just instinct. It allowed for the passing down of wisdom. The child, in its prolonged state of becoming, is not just a passenger on the journey of the species, but its primary apprentice. And so, from this cradle of dependence, we step into a new era, an era where children do not just learn to survive. They learn how to live within a world of immense complexity, a world they did not make, but are now prepared to change. If our greatest strength was born from our most glaring weakness, what other paradoxes lie at the heart of what it means to be human? Perhaps the next layer of this story is found not in the social world the child enters, but in the mysterious, unfinished landscape of the mind itself, a brain born soft and impressionable, a blank slate waiting for the world to write its first indelible lessons. A human infant is born unfinished. In the quiet, dim light of a safe room, this new being seems the very picture of vulnerability. Its eyes, when they open, hold a deep, unfocused curiosity. Its hands grasp instinctively, but without purpose. For months, it will be entirely dependent on the care of others for its most basic survival. Now, consider another birth, in the dappled sunlight of a forest canopy. A newborn monkey clings to its mother's fur with an innate, practiced strength. Within hours, it can coordinate its limbs, recognize the silhouette of a predator, and understand the complex social hierarchy it has entered. It is, in a very real sense, ready. So why did evolution, that relentless sculptor of efficient life, design us to enter the world so profoundly unprepared? Why would nature accept the staggering risk of a brain that is, at birth, merely a blueprint? The answer lies not in a flaw, but in a radical evolutionary strategy. A trade-off was made, a gamble of monumental proportions. While other creatures are born with their instincts hardwired, their paths largely predetermined by genetics, a human is born with a mind open to the world. Our weakness is the very source of our strength. A newborn human's brain is only about 25% of its eventual adult size. Compare this to our primate cousins. A newborn chimpanzee's brain is already nearly 70% of its adult volume. This difference is not a deficit, but a necessity. The human skull, to pass through the narrow birth canal of our bipedal ancestors, cannot accommodate a fully formed brain. We are born, in a sense, too early. But this biological constraint was transformed into an evolutionary masterpiece. The brain's most dramatic growth happens outside, the womb, in the full, dazzling, and often chaotic theater of the world. It is a period of explosive development, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of abstract thought, future planning, impulse control, and moral reasoning. This region, which makes us most uniquely human, is the last to mature, its intricate wiring laid down not by genes alone, but by experience. Is it possible that our greatest cognitive gifts are the ones we must learn rather than the ones we are born with? This story of postnatal brain building is written in the ancient stone of our ancestors. Fossilized skulls of Neanderthal and early Homo sapiens children reveal a pattern of cranial development strikingly similar to our own. The subtle impressions on the inner surface of a child's skull, the unfused sutures that allowed the cranium to expand, these are the silent testimonials to a childhood that stretched over years. This extended period of neural plasticity, this software programming over of the brain by the environment, was a hallmark of our lineage. It was a shift from a closed system to an open one. Instead of being locked into a specific ecological niche with a set of rigid behaviors, the human brain became a general-purpose learning machine. It could be shaped by the tundra, the savanna, or the forest. It could learn to track a mammoth, weave a basket, or eventually write a symphony. The brain's unfinished state was not an accident of anatomy. It was the key to our global dominion. What does it mean that the very structure of our success is built upon a foundation of prolonged helplessness? We see the breathtaking results of this plasticity in the modern world. A child today, born into a digital age their ancestors could not have conceived, can navigate the abstract symbols of multiple languages before they lose their baby teeth. They can grasp the principles of critical thinking, manipulate virtual realities, and solve problems that have no precedent in our evolutionary history. This is not because modern children are inherently smarter, but because the ancient, malleable architecture of their brains is designed to absorb, adapt, and innovate. The same neural machinery that once learned to chip a hand axe from flint now learns to code in Python. The social complexities a child must navigate, from playground politics to global digital networks, are far more intricate than any our ancestors faced, yet the brain meets the challenge with the same voracious plasticity. It is a tool of immense potential, waiting for its curriculum. But if this potential is so vast, why does it feel so fragile? This leads us to the counterpoint, the shadow side of this magnificent gamble. A brain that is soft-wired is inherently more vulnerable. It is susceptible to trauma, to neglect, to the wrong kind of programming. The very openness that allows for language and culture also allows for fear, prejudice, and maladaptive behaviors to take deep root. An instinct is reliable. It is a finished product. Learning is a process, fraught with error and deeply dependent on the quality of the teachers and the environment. For every child who thrives, another may struggle. Nature, in bestowing this gift of potential, also placed a tremendous burden on the community. The survival of the individual became inextricably linked to the knowledge and care of the group. The infant's weakness demanded a strength in others. So, what was the catalyst that made this high-risk strategy not just viable but spectacularly successful? What changed the equation, turning a period of vulnerability into a sustained opportunity for growth? The answer does not lie in what the infant brain lacks, but in what its environment can provide. And perhaps no single discovery in human history was more pivotal in shaping that environment than the harnessing of fire. It was a technology that rewrote the rules of survival, and, in doing so, fundamentally altered the relationship between the generations. When our ancestors learned to control flame, they did more than just ward off predators or warm their caves. They unlocked a new kind of energy, not just for their bodies, but for their minds. The act of cooking, of using fire to pre-digest food outside the body, had a revolutionary consequence. It drastically reduced the time and metabolic energy required for digestion. Tough roots and raw meat, which would have demanded hours of strenuous chewing and gut processing, became soft, calorie-dense meals. This nutritional windfall did more than just feed muscles. It began to fuel the most energy-hungry organ in the body, the rapidly developing plastic brain. This shift created a new temporal landscape. With less time needed for foraging and chewing, there was more time for something else. Time for sitting together around the flickering light, time for observation, for imitation, for the slow, patient transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next. The fire became the first classroom, the original hearth of culture. It extended the day, pushing back the darkness and creating a safe space where stories could be told, skills demonstrated, and social bonds reinforced. The child, with its unfinished brain, was no longer just a passive recipient of care, but an active apprentice in this new, fire-lit world. The flames did not just cook food, they simmered the stew of human culture, allowing knowledge to accumulate and compound in ways that were previously impossible. The brain's potential could now be met with a corresponding potential for teaching. But if fire provided the time and the safety for learning, what was the nature of the first lesson? Was it the skill to make a tool? Or was it something deeper, something about the very act of sharing knowledge itself? When our ancestors first held a piece of meat over a flame, they were doing more than just cooking dinner. They were cooking the very future of childhood itself. This was not merely a culinary innovation. It was a biological and social revolution, the first spark in the long, slow burn of human development. The mastery of fire did not just change what we ate, it began to change who we were, and more specifically, how long we got to be children. What is the connection between a controlled flame and the elongated, vulnerable period of youth that defines our species? It is a story written in the embers of ancient hearths, a narrative where a tool for survival became the cradle for learning. The biological transformation began in the gut. Before fire, our predecessors spent hours each day chewing tough, raw tubers and fibrous meats, their large intestines and powerful jaws working tirelessly to extract sufficient nutrients. The act of cooking acted as a form of external digestion, using heat to break down complex proteins and carbohydrates long before they entered the body. This simple act triggered a profound evolutionary trade-off. The energy once required to maintain a large, energetically expensive digestive system was suddenly freed. That surplus of calories, that biological windfall, was diverted. It was reinvested with monumental consequences into the most demanding organ of all, the brain. A smaller gut meant a larger cranium could be supported. But this new brain, this burgeoning galaxy of neurons, came with a cost. It was born unfinished, incredibly plastic, and desperately needy. It required a long, protected period outside the womb to wire itself, to absorb the complexities of the world. The extended period of childhood dependency, once a dangerous liability, became a necessary investment. The fire that softened the food also, paradoxically, hardened the conditions for a prolonged infancy. Could it be that the helplessness of a human baby is not a sign of weakness, but the signature of a metabolic bargain struck beside a primeval campfire? This biological shift found its social expression around the very source of the change, the hearth. At a site in Israel, traces of ash and burned stone whisper a story 800,000 years old. Here, a group of Homo erectus did not just occasionally use fire, they maintained it, nurtured it, and built their lives around it. The hearth became the first true center of human community, a precursor to the kitchen, the classroom, and the living room. As daylight faded, the circle of light defined a sanctuary from the dark, a space where predators feared to tread and the clan could gather. In this flickering arena, the pace of life slowed. With full bellies and safe hands, time was created. It was time not just for rest, but for interaction. Here, an elder might demonstrate the precise way to nap a flake from a core of flint, the child's eyes following the movements, learning through patient observation. Here, the day's events might be recounted through gesture and guttural sound, the first fragments of narrative being woven into the group's collective memory. The firelight, dancing on intent faces, was the first projector, illuminating not just the physical space but the landscape of shared knowledge. The hearth was the original university, its curriculum built on mimicry, story, and social bonding. Was the fire, then, our first teacher? This ancient dynamic echoes powerfully into the present. The modern dining table, with its electric light overhead, is the direct descendant of that primal circle. The ritual of sharing a meal remains a fundamental vehicle for the transmission of culture, manners, and connection. It is where vocabulary is absorbed, where family histories are shared, where the subtle cues of empathy and conversation are practiced. The fire has been tamed into the stove, but its social function persists. It continues to be the anchor point around which the slow, essential process of child rearing unfolds. We have simply swapped the crackle of wood for the hum of a refrigerator, but the purpose remains: to create a stable, warm center where the young can learn the intricate scripts of their society at a leisurely pace. In our frantic, digitized age, the decline of the shared meal might then represent more than a change in habit. Could it signal an erosion of the very platform upon which childhood's slow education was built? Yet, a provocative thought arises. We often imagine that tools, language, and fire were inventions forged in the crucible of adult necessity, for more efficient hunting, for complex coordination, for survival. But what if the causality is reversed, or at least intertwined? What if these monumental innovations were equally driven by and for the needs of the child? A stone tool could be used to butcher game, but it could also be used to process soft food for a toothless infant. Language could coordinate a hunt, but its more fundamental purpose might have been the lullaby, the warning cry, the patient naming of objects for a curious toddler. Fire provided warmth and safety, creating the stable environment essential for a long, vulnerable development. Perhaps these technologies were not just the drivers of our intelligence, but the necessary supports for a new kind of being, a being born with the potential for immense learning, but requiring an unprecedented investment of time and care. Did we invent childhood, or did the demands of the evolving child's brain invent the technologies that made childhood possible? When the first flame was carefully sheltered and fed, a new clock started ticking for humanity. It was a slower clock. The race was no longer solely about reaching reproductive age quickly, but about filling the expanding years of youth with meaning, skill, and knowledge. The fire that shortened the time needed for digestion inadvertently lengthened the time available for education. It created a space where the human mind could simmer on a low heat, absorbing the flavors of its culture. But this new, prolonged childhood, sheltered by technology and fed by collective knowledge, introduced a new, profound challenge. Survival was no longer just an individual pursuit. It became a collective enterprise centered on the young. The energy saved by the gut was now poured into the intricate, demanding task of social bonding. How does a group of individuals, each with their own burgeoning self-awareness, learn to coexist, to share, to care for the utterly dependent? The hearth provided the warmth, but it also illuminated the necessity of the first social contract. And so, around the children of Homo erectus, a new structure began to form, more complex than any stone tool. The archaeological record hints at it, in the remains of individuals who survived injuries that would have been fatal without years of support, in the evidence of food sharing that extended beyond the immediate mother. A web of relationships was being spun, a network of care that involved not just parents, but grandparents, aunts, uncles, and peers. This was the first incubator of society. Within this nascent network, the stakes of communication were raised exponentially. Gestures, sounds, and facial expressions began to carry heavier meanings, to be codified into something more predictable, more shared. The emotions that bonded parent to child now had to be stretched to encompass the wider group. The success of the child, and thus the tribe, depended on this expanding circle of trust. If fire provided the stage and the time for learning, then this emerging social sphere became the curriculum itself. What is a child within this first social home, if not a student of connection, learning the fragile grammar of trust and reciprocity that would come to define its species? Before there were schools, churches, or laws, what did humanity have? A circle of adults around a child. In the profound quiet of prehistory, this may have been the first and most essential social unit. The infant, utterly helpless, its survival dependent not on strength or speed, but on the care of others, posed a question to the world. Was it not the child, in its profound vulnerability, that compelled the first humans to become truly social? Could it be that society itself was born not from the club of the hunter, but from the cradle of the infant? This initial hearth of sociology, the primal social cell, was not built on trade or treaties, but on a biological imperative far more urgent. Unlike many animals whose young are swiftly independent, human infants arrive in a state of radical prematurity. Their brains are unfinished, their bodies uncoordinated. This is not a flaw, but a feature, an evolutionary gamble of staggering proportions. To survive, our species developed a strategy known as alloparenting, a term that simply means care by others. It is the collective raising of the young. A single mother, exhausted and foraging, could not do it alone. The child's weakness became the group's binding force, demanding coordination, communication, and a shared responsibility that transcended immediate kinship. The cry of an infant did not just signal hunger. It was a call to assemble, a demand for communal action. In this shared vulnerability, the first threads of social fabric were spun. Did society emerge from a contract between equals, or from an unspoken pact to protect the most unequal among us? The evidence for this ancient nursery is etched not in stone tablets, but in the very bones of our past. Archaeological sites from our deep history often reveal a telling pattern. The remains of the very old are found alongside the very young. In a world defined by brutal survival, the continued presence of elders, individuals past their prime reproductive years, suggests a role far more significant than mere existence. They were the first librarians, the original teachers. While parents hunted and gathered, these grandparents and elders became the guardians of the hearth, the storytellers who wove the group's knowledge into the pliable minds of children. Their wisdom, hard-won from a lifetime of experience, became the first curriculum. They taught which plants healed and which harmed, how to track the migrating herds, how to read the signs of the changing seasons. This intergenerational transfer of knowledge, from the experienced to the inexperienced, was a revolutionary advantage. It meant that each new generation did not have to rediscover the world from scratch. The circle around the child, therefore, included not just parents, but the living memory of the tribe itself. Was the value of an elder measured not by their strength, but by the stories they could tell a child? This ancient blueprint is not a relic. It remains the hidden architecture of our modern lives, visible in the cultural patterns that persist across the globe. The system of grandparents, aunts, uncles in the village is not merely a sentimental tradition. It is a functional echo of our alloparenting past. In countless cultures, the child remains the gravitational center of social cohesion. Family gatherings, community festivals, even the simple act of neighbors watching over one another's children, all are modern manifestations of that primal circle. The child, through its very existence, creates a network of obligations and affections that binds people together, forcing interactions and fostering bonds that might otherwise fray. The child becomes the reason for the tribe to gather, to cooperate, to see itself as a collective with a shared future. Does the modern obsession with the nuclear family, then, represent a departure from a deeper, more communal instinct that has sustained us for millennia? This narrative, however, presents a compelling counterpoint. If society formed primarily to protect the young, what does that say about our fundamental nature? Conventional wisdom often paints early human society as a web of mutual self-interest, a system of exchange where I scratch your back so that you will scratch mine. But the circle around the child suggests a different origin story. It implies that our first social impulse was not transactional, but custodial. It was not about maximizing individual gain, but about ensuring collective survival through the nurturing of the next generation. The most critical resource was not food or tools, but the fragile spark of human potential. Does this mean that humanity's first and most profound social contract was not between competing adults, but between the entire community and its children? Was society born not from the desire to trade, but from the simple, undeniable fact that a child cannot grow up alone? If it is true that children compelled humanity to become social, then this leads to an even more profound question, one that lies at the heart of what it means to be human. The child's helplessness demands society, but society, in turn, demands a specific kind of child, one capable of learning its intricate rules. This necessitates a paradox, a prolonged period of vulnerability. Why do human children require so many years to learn how to simply be in the world? Other animals are walking, foraging, and fending for themselves within weeks or months. A human child needs over a decade of constant care and instruction. This is not an inefficiency. It is the price of admission to a complex society. The struggle is no longer purely physical. It is a cognitive and social marathon. The child must learn not just to walk and talk, but to navigate a labyrinth of unspoken rules, to decipher the subtle language of facial expressions and tone of voice, to understand reciprocity, loyalty, shame, and love. It must learn to be part of the tribe. This long childhood is the necessary apprenticeship for social life. The brain during this extended period is not merely growing, it is being sculpted by its social environment, its neural pathways forged through countless interactions within that protective circle. So, if the child is the architect of the first society, and society requires a child who takes years to mature, what does this say about the world we have built? The rules are no longer just about which berries are poisonous. They are about abstract justice, digital etiquette, and global economics. The social landscape a child must learn to read is immeasurably more complex than that of a prehistoric hunter-gatherer. Does the modern world, with its overwhelming complexity, demand an even longer, more protected childhood? Or has it, in its frantic pace, begun to dismantle the very circle of alloparenting that made such a childhood possible? The circle of adults around the child was the first classroom, the first support system, the first society. But if that circle is now broken, fragmented by distance and distraction, what becomes of the child's long and necessary journey? And what, then, becomes of us? A young monkey, within a matter of months, will cling to its mother, then venture to a nearby branch, and soon after, navigate the forest canopy with a self-sufficient grace. Its childhood is a brief, efficient tutorial on survival. A human child, in that same span of time, has only just begun to focus its eyes. It will require more than a decade of constant care, guidance, and immersion before it can even begin to navigate the intricate web of its own community. This is not a failure of biology, but rather its most profound achievement. Is it possible that the price of a sophisticated mind is a prolonged and vulnerable infancy? That the smarter the animal, the slower its young must mature? This extended period of dependence is written into the very architecture of our brains. While the regions governing basic functions like heartbeat and breathing are operational at birth, the neural landscapes responsible for our humanity remain vast, unfinished territories. The prefrontal cortex, that seat of judgment, impulse control, and complex reasoning, is a late bloomer, its network slowly maturing throughout childhood and adolescence. The amygdala, the alarm bell for danger and social threat, must be carefully calibrated against this growing cortex, learning not to scream at a sideways glance or a misunderstood joke. And the temporoparietal junction, a crucial hub for theory of mind, diligently builds its maps, trying to answer the fundamental question, what could they be thinking? This is the biological substrate of socialization, a slow, deliberate wiring of the brain for empathy, strategy, and deception. It is the hardware that must be installed before the most complex software of culture can run. We are not born with social wisdom. We grow it, neuron by neuron, over years of trial and error. The archaeological record offers a silent testament to this ancient, necessary apprenticeship. Deep within caves, illuminated by the flickering light of long-extinct fires, our ancestors left behind more than just handprints and prey animals. They painted scenes of community, groups of figures hunting, dancing, perhaps mourning. These images whisper of a social world already dense with unspoken rules, with hierarchies, roles, and shared rituals. A child born into that world would not need to learn merely how to sharpen a spear, but how to read the posture of the hunt leader, to interpret the tone of a story told around the fire, to understand their place within a delicate social order. The survival of the individual depended on the cohesion of the group, and the cohesion of the group depended on each new generation successfully learning a silent language of gestures, glances, and expectations. The childhood required to master this language was not a luxury. It was a necessity etched into the survival strategy of our species. In our modern, hyper-connected world, this silent language has evolved into a dizzying symphony of codes. A child today must learn to decipher not only the nuanced body language of a playground, the subtle shift in a friend's stance that signals betrayal or alliance, but also the manufactured personas of digital spaces. They must navigate the implied hierarchies of a classroom, the unspoken rules of a family dinner, and the complex moral algebra of fairness and loyalty. This is an advanced course in social physics, where the smallest micro-expression can carry the weight of a verdict. No other species demands that its young become such adept psychologists, such intuitive anthropologists. The curriculum of childhood has expanded exponentially, yet the time frame for learning it remains stubbornly, biologically fixed. We are asking our children's slowly maturing prefrontal cortices to process a world of social information that would have been unimaginable even a generation ago. This leads us to a question that curls back on itself, a chicken and egg paradox of human development. Did the burgeoning complexity of human society create the need for a long childhood? Or did the evolutionary gift of a long childhood, this protected space for neural plasticity and learning, actually permit human society to become so complex in the first place? Did our slow-growing brains provide the cognitive surplus required for art, law, and technology? It is a loop without a clear beginning. The complexity of the social world demands a brain capable of managing it, and that very capacity is forged within the crucible of that social world. The group raises the child, but the child's prolonged malleability ultimately redesigns the group. When a creature requires over a decade of dedicated tutelage just to function within its own kind, the act of parenting transforms from mere nourishment into a sacred pedagogy. Adults become the curators of reality, the interpreters of the social script. But the most effective teaching, it seems, is not found in rigid lectures or dictated rules. The primary vehicle for this immense transfer of knowledge is not work, but play. In the seemingly frivolous games of chase, in the negotiations over toy ownership, in the elaborate fantasies concocted between friends, children are running the simulations that their slow-maturing brains need. They are practicing the very skills that their complex society will demand. So if play is the serious work of childhood, what evolutionary masterpiece are we witnessing when a child loses themselves in a world of pure imagination? A child's hand, smeared with the vibrant pigment of a crayon, moves across a pristine wall. The line it creates is not an act of vandalism, but a cartography of a nascent mind. In another room, a small figure drapes a towel as a cape, brandishing a wooden spoon against an invisible foe. These scenes are universal, these foolish games a constant across cultures and time. We dismiss them as the frivolous pastimes of those not yet burdened with purpose. But what if we have it backwards? What if this period of protracted, energy-intensive play is not an escape from the serious business of life, but its very crucible? The question hangs in the air, not of why children play, but why evolution, that ruthless economist, would dedicate so many precious years to what appears to be pure, unproductive delight. The answer begins not in the psychology textbook, but in the humming circuitry of the brain itself. When a child pretends, something remarkable happens behind their eyes. Neurologically, play is not a single, simple state, but a symphony of activation. The motor cortex lights up, rehearsing precise movements, the careful placement of a block, the controlled swing of a pretend sword. Simultaneously, the social brain, the network responsible for understanding others' intentions and emotions, engages fully. The child is not just moving, they are being. They are simulating a reality. This is the biological genius of play. It is a safe-to-fail simulation engine. In the protected space of the imagination, a child can practice being a predator or the prey, a leader or a follower, a caregiver or a warrior without any of the real-world consequences. The brain, in its plasticity, is not just learning skills. It is building the very frameworks for possibility, weaving together neural pathways that link action with intention and intention with empathy. It is a biological dress rehearsal for the complex drama of human social life. This rehearsal is not a modern invention. The evidence is etched into the most humble of artifacts, silent testimonies from the deep past. Archaeologists, sifting through the remains of ancient settlements, often overlook the smallest finds. But among the stone tools and animal bones, we sometimes find tiny, carefully flaked flints, too small for an adult hand, or crude clay figurines of animals and people. These are not ritual objects. They are the toys of prehistoric children. A small spear, perfectly weighted for a child's arm, was not a weapon for hunting, but a tool for practicing the hunt. A miniature clay pot was not for storing grain, but for mimicking the gathering and preparation of food. Through play, the child of 20,000 years ago was not wasting time. They were engaged in the most critical of apprenticeships. They were beta testing their future roles, running the software of their culture through the hardware of their developing bodies. The games of tag in a sun-drenched clearing were drills in evasion and pursuit, fundamental to survival. The simple act of building a fort from branches was an exercise in spatial reasoning and basic engineering. The social negotiations of who gets to be the chief, or who is responsible for the imaginary fire, were the first parliaments, the foundational codes of law and cooperation being written in the dust. This ancient classroom has no walls, and its curriculum is written in the language of gesture and imagination. In a modern playground, the same primordial scripts are enacted, translated into a new context. Children playing house are not merely copying their parents. They are deconstructing and reassembling the complex dynamics of family, power, care, and conflict. The doll is not a toy. It is a prop in a profound social experiment. When one child declares, "I'm the doctor now," they are stepping into a role that carries immense social weight. They must learn to project authority, to show empathy, to negotiate with a patient who is scared or uncooperative. The game itself is a fragile ecosystem, constantly on the verge of collapse because it's not fair, or you're not doing it right. And in navigating these collapses, in the tears and the reconciliations, the children are learning the most valuable lesson of all: how to repair a broken social contract. There are no blackboards here, no lectures on ethics. The learning is embodied, emotional, and immediate. The stakes are not grades, but social survival within the microcosm of their peers. Is this not a more potent education than any theoretical lesson? Yet, a dissenting voice whispers from the margins of our efficiency-obsessed world. Is it not a luxury, this extended childhood? A wasteful expenditure of calories and time in a universe that favors lean, mean, and immediate functionality? We see this pressure in the modern push to replace free play with structured activities, to fill the Kong-bai space with flashcards and scheduled lessons, optimizing the child for a perceived future. But this view mistakes the process for the product. To strip away play is to strip away the developmental stage where the core operating system of humanity is installed. What emerges without it? Perhaps a creature of pure instinct and drilled response, capable of performing tasks but incapable of adapting to the novel, the unexpected, the nuanced. The child who never engages in rough-and-tumble play may not learn the subtle boundaries between aggression and camaraderie. The child who never pretends may struggle to model the inner world of another. Are they still fully human? Or has a fundamental chord of our species' nature been left unstrung? The question is not merely philosophical. It echoes in the social deficits of a world that increasingly devalues unstructured time. So we begin to see that the sandbox is not a diversion. It is an evolutionary testing ground, a biological and social laboratory of immense sophistication. Within its bounded chaos, the future is prototyped. And in this laboratory, every experiment carries a cost. The child who builds a tower of blocks experiences the glorious tension of its ascent, only to witness its inevitable crash. The euphoria of winning a game is shadowed by the sting of loss for another. This is the final and perhaps most critical lesson embedded in play. It teaches us how to hurt. The pain of a scraped knee from a fall during tag is trivial compared to the psychic pain of exclusion from a game, the bitterness of unfairness, the frustration of failure. These are not bugs in the system, they are essential features. Evolution is not interested in creating beings who only know how to win. It needs beings who know how to lose, and yet still choose to play again. It needs beings who can navigate the intricate landscape of social pain without breaking. The child who falls from the tree, cries, and then, tentatively, approaches the trunk once more, is learning resilience. The one who argues over the rules and then compromises is learning the foundations of justice. And so, we are left not with an answer, but with a deeper, more resonant question. If childhood play is the cradle where our humanity is forged, then what does it mean that the very first things we learn in that cradle are the intricate dances of conflict, cooperation, victory, and the profound, essential art of enduring loss? The crayon mark on the wall is not just a line, it is a boundary crossed, a risk taken, a world created and then left behind. The game ends, the players scatter, but the lessons linger in the muscle and the mind, preparing us for a world where the games never truly stop. They only change their form. The child's play is a whisper from our deep past, asking if we, the adults who have left the playground behind, have forgotten how to listen to its fundamental, painful, and beautiful truths. But this training ground of imagination and social nuance was, for most of our history, tethered to an immediate and brutal reality. The games were not just about social roles. They were rehearsals for survival in a world that was indifferent to your existence. The playful chase through the trees was a drill for escaping predators. The careful aiming of a thrown stone was the foundation of hunting. The line between play and practice was invisible, the stakes implied in every action. So, if the social world was the first classroom, then the physical world was the first and most demanding teacher. How did the seemingly careless, repetitive acts of a child, the climbing, the falling, the throwing, sculpt a creature capable of conquering the planet? The answer lies not in the safety of the playground, but in the peril of the ancient forest. The child falls from the low-hanging branch, a soft thud on the damp earth. A moment of stunned silence is broken, not by a cry, but by a gurgle of laughter. Dusting off small hands, the child looks up at the tree, not with fear, but with a fresh, calculating curiosity. The climb begins again. This scene, played out in countless backyards and forests, seems like a simple moment of childhood resilience. But what if it is something more ancient, more essential? What if this seemingly carefree play is, in fact, a deeply encoded training program, a warrior's boot camp disguised in the soft, appealing packaging of youth? Is childhood itself an evolutionary strategy for survival? The answer begins not in the playground, but within the intricate, blossoming landscape of the young brain. A child's nervous system is not a blank slate, but a system pre-wired for a specific kind of learning, trial and error. Unlike an adult brain, which has pruned its connections for efficiency, the child's brain is a wild, exuberant garden of synapses. In early childhood, the brain experiences a period of explosive growth, creating far more neural connections than it will ever need. This synaptic bloom is not chaos, it is a biological imperative for exploration. Every fall from a tree, every successful grasp of a branch, every misjudged distance is a data point. The brain is not just learning how to climb a tree. It is building a comprehensive internal map of physics, risk, and the capabilities of its own body. The stumble is not a failure but a crucial data entry, a correction that strengthens some neural pathways and allows others to fade. This is learning in its purest, most fundamental form, a constant, real-time calibration of action and consequence, all conducted under the relatively safe banner of play. The brain is using the world as its laboratory, and the price of admission is a scraped knee. This biological drive finds its echo in the deep past. In the shadowy recess of a Neanderthal dwelling, archaeologists have unearthed something poignant. Small, carefully crafted stone tools, miniature versions of the adult spears and scrapers. They are too delicate for serious work, their edges blunted by inexperience. These were not the tools of hunters, but the toys of children. Here, in the flickering firelight of prehistory, we see the same principle at work. The child was not suddenly expected to face a woolly mammoth. First, they played at being a hunter. They practiced the motions of the thrust, the careful shaping of a flint, the silent stalk through the imagined grasslands of their home. Play became a controlled environment, a safe simulator for dangerous future behaviors. The stakes were low, but the lessons were profound. Through this ritualized mimicry, the child was internalizing not just skills, but an identity. They were learning the rhythms of their culture, the patterns of cooperation, the silent language of the hunt. The game was a rehearsal for life itself, a way to compress generations of hard-won knowledge into the manageable span of a childhood. This ancient curriculum persists, translated into the modern rituals of the schoolyard. The frantic, joyous chaos of a game of tag is not merely a release of energy. It is a masterclass in situational awareness, acceleration, and evasion. The intricate rules and whispered strategies of hide-and-seek hone the ability to read an environment for concealment and threat, to judge the intentions of others from the slightest sound or shadow. The seemingly reckless abandon of climbing frames and jungle gyms builds a sophisticated understanding of balance, leverage, and the limits of physical strength. In these games, children are being trained for a world of variables and unpredictability. They are learning to navigate social hierarchies, to form fleeting alliances, to assess friend from foe in the blink of an eye. The playground, then, is not an escape from the real world, but a fundamental training ground for it. It is where the human animal practices the art of survival in a world that is, and always has been, full of sudden shifts and hidden dangers. Yet, this presents a profound paradox. If the world is so perilous, why would evolution design a creature so vulnerable and then grant it a phase of life characterized by such apparent risk-taking? Why allow the young to expend precious calories on frivolous games, to expose themselves to potential harm, when caution would seem the wiser strategy? The counterintuitive truth may be that the risk is not a bug in the system, but an essential feature. A childhood devoid of calculated risk creates an adult incapable of managing the unknown. The scraped knee teaches the body's limits. The fall from the low branch teaches a healthy respect for height. By engaging in controlled encounters with danger, the child builds a resilience that pure protection could never foster. The potential for harm is the very friction that sharpens the instincts. To remove all risk is to create a different, perhaps greater vulnerability, the inability to cope when inevitably the safeguards fail. Is the true danger not the fall, but the failure to ever learn how to get back up? So, the boldness we see in a child's play is not mere recklessness. It is evolution's test run. It is the necessary iterative process of forging a capable adult through the fires of minor, manageable failures. Each laugh after a fall, each determined reclimbing of the tree is a testament to a biological program of immense sophistication. But this program has a critical limitation. The child, for all its innate programming and practice skills, cannot survive alone. The lessons learned on the playground are ephemeral, etched into neural pathways but not into the shared memory of the tribe. The child can learn to climb, but it cannot learn why. Certain trees are forbidden, or who might be waiting in their branches. It can practice the hunt, but it cannot inherit the story of the great bear that stalks the northern valley. The individual trial and error of a single lifetime is not enough. For the knowledge to accumulate, for the lessons of the fallen to benefit the next generation, something else is required. The child needs a keeper of stories, a guardian of warnings, a living library of hard-won experience. They need someone who remembers the pain. The silence of the La Ferrasi cave is not empty. It holds a shape, a story fossilized in limestone and time. For over 70,000 years the skeletons have lain there, an adult, curled protectively around the fragile bones of a child. The earth settled around them, sealing the moment. What instinct, what profound and unbreakable force held that mother in an eternal embrace long after her child's last breath had faded? Was it simply the biological refusal to let go? Or was it the first raw expression of a grief so uniquely human that it would come to shape our entire world? This ancient tableau is not just a relic of death. It is the birthplace of a particular kind of memory, a memory forged in loss that would become the deepest, most compelling reason to protect life. The biology of this bond is a quiet storm of chemistry and evolution. In the mammalian world, the mother-offspring bond is often a practical affair, a temporary tether of nourishment and protection that loosens as independence grows. But in humans, something different happened. Our systems of dopamine and oxytocin, the neurochemical architects of reward and bonding, became deeply intertwined and exaggerated. The connection between a human mother and her child is not a brief transaction. It is a long, slow dance. It is built not just on the immediate need for milk and warmth, but on the exchange of gazes, the recognition of a smile, the soothing power of a heartbeat against a tiny ear. This prolonged attachment is an evolutionary gamble. It invests an enormous amount of energy and emotional capital into a single, vulnerable being over many years. The payoff is a creature of immense potential, but the risk is a corresponding depth of devastation. The neural pathways that light up with joy at a child's laugh are the very same that plunge into a profound darkness at their absence. This is not a design flaw. Is this profound capacity for loss, then, the necessary shadow cast by our immense capacity for love? This shadow falls across the archaeological record, leaving traces more eloquent than any written history. At La Ferrasi, at Shanidar, where a Neanderthal man was buried with flowers, and at Sungir in Russia, where 2 children were laid to rest adorned with thousands of ivory beads, we see a pattern emerge. The careful, deliberate burial of the young, often with grave goods that would have required significant effort to produce, speaks a universal language. It whispers that these small lives, cut short, held a value that transcended their physical utility. A bead, a flint tool, a handful of blossoms placed in a grave. These are not for the dead. They are for the living. They are the first attempts to mend a tear in the fabric of a community, to say, "You were here. You mattered." This ritualized grief suggests a dawning awareness. The death of a child is not just a personal tragedy, but a collective one. It is the extinguishing of a future that the entire group had a stake in. Does the act of burial, then, represent the moment a society begins to see its own reflection in the vulnerability of its youngest members? This reflection has only grown sharper with time. In our modern world, where childhood mortality has plummeted in many places, the cultural weight placed upon a single child has intensified to an almost unbearable degree. The child becomes the central vessel for a family's hopes, the repository of its legacy and its dreams. The global nature of this phenomenon is striking. From the Victorian-era post-mortem photographs, where infants were posed as if sleeping in their parents' arms, to the lullabies that speak of loss, to the elaborate memorials in online spaces, we see a consistent, cross-cultural effort to grapple with this specific pain. The memory of loss, whether personal or historical, becomes a powerful engine for social change. It drives the establishment of pediatric medicine, the creation of child labor laws, the building of safer schools. A society's commitment to protecting its children is, in many ways, a measure of how well it remembers the pain of failing to do so. We build fortresses of safety not just from logic, but from the ghostly echoes of past sorrows. But does this very fortress, built from love and memory, also create a new kind of anxiety? a world where the child is seen as so precious that it must be shielded from all risk, even the necessary risks of becoming. A counter voice might ask, with cold rationality, why such profound grief for a life that has produced nothing, for a being that has not hunted, built, or contributed to the material wealth of the tribe? This question, however, misses the fundamental point. The value of a child does not lie in what it has already done, but in what it might become. It is the value of potential itself. A child is a story with only the first chapter written, a map with vast, uncharted territories. To lose a child is not to lose a possession or a laborer. It is to lose a future. It is to mourn the unwritten poem, the undiscovered land, the unplayed song. The grief is so deep precisely because it is for a world of possibilities, a universe of what if that collapses into a single, silent period. Could it be that our ability to envision these futures, to grieve for them before they even exist, is the very wellspring of our creativity and our drive to build a better world? The emotion of loss reveals a profound truth. Childhood is not merely a period of being fed, but of being cherished. And when that cherishing is encoded into memory, when the ghost of a lost child in a cave can move us 70,000 years later, then knowledge itself begins to be passed down, not just as a set of instructions, but as a sacred legacy. The mother in the cave did not just cling to a body, she clung to a connection that defined her humanity. Her silent vigil poses a question that echoes into our present. If the memory of loss is the foundation of protection, what does the way we protect our children today say about the losses we fear for tomorrow? This legacy of protection, born from the memory of loss, naturally evolved into something more than just a shield. It became a gift. The same extended childhood that made the bond so profound also created a space, a prolonged and vulnerable window, for a different kind of nourishment. It was no longer enough to simply keep the child alive. The potential that was so cherished had to be filled. The mother's body provided milk, but her mind began to provide a different sustenance. She would point to the horizon, not just to warn of danger, but to indicate where the sun sets, where the water flows, which berries nourish, and which bring delirium. The act of feeding became intertwined with the act of teaching. The child, safe in the cradle of this extended dependence, became the student. The knowledge of generations, the migration routes of caribou, the secret language of bird calls that signals water, the stories of ancestors that define a tribe's identity, could now flow from one mind to another. This was not a sudden invention, but a slow accretion, a cultural dawn breaking. The vulnerability of the child, once only a source of anxiety, became the very reason for the accumulation of culture. Does this mean that our greatest strength, our accumulated knowledge, is ultimately a monument to our prolonged helplessness? This transmission was never a simple download of data. It was a living stream, fed by the emotional connection first forged in that primal bond. A lesson about edible plants was delivered with a tone of voice, a squeeze of the hand, a story about the time grandfather found this very root during a famine. The knowledge was wrapped in care, making it more memorable, more valuable. The child learned not just what to do, but why it mattered, and for whom. The world was not presented as a list of facts, but as a narrative in which they had a part to play. The long childhood allowed for play, for experimentation, for mistakes made under the safety of a watchful eye. A boy could fumble with a spear thrower without starving the tribe. A girl could mix the wrong herbs without causing death. This safe space for failure was a luxury that no other species could afford on such a scale, and it became the engine of innovation. Could it be that every human advancement, from the wheel to the web, owes a debt to the countless children who were allowed to play, to imagine, to get it wrong before they had to get it right? The mother was the first teacher, but soon the entire community became a classroom. The elders, their own child-rearing years behind them, became libraries of survival, their memories the most valuable resource. The bond of protection expanded from a single dyad to a network of care and instruction. This was the birth of tradition, a river of knowledge flowing from the old to the young, ensuring that hard-won lessons did not die with the individual. The death of a child was a tragedy of lost potential, but the death of an elder was a library burning down. Both were profound losses, two sides of the same coin of cultural continuity. The community that protected its children with such fervor also learned to honor its elders, for they held the maps that would guide those children into the future. In this intricate dance, did we inadvertently create a new kind of immortality, not of the body, but of the idea, the story, the way of living? This flow of information, from sua-mi to survival skills, established a new rhythm for human life. It created a debt that could never be fully repaid, only passed on. The room is quiet, save for the soft, rhythmic sounds of a newborn feeding. In the half-light, this act seems the very picture of simplicity, a biological transaction as old as mammalian life itself. But to see only nutrition is to miss the deeper current flowing between mother and child. She is not just providing sustenance, she is transmitting information. A complex living code passes from her body to his, a silent conversation written in fats, proteins, and sugars. This is the first curriculum, the original data stream. But how can a stream of milk carry something as abstract as knowledge? The answer begins not with grand theories, but deep within the molecular architecture of the milk itself. It is a substance of astonishing intelligence, far exceeding its role as mere food. Beyond the antibodies that stand as a personalized army against pathogens, the milk carries a delicate cocktail of hormones, each a subtle instructor. Among them, oxytocin, the so-called bonding molecule, flows freely. This is not just a chemical that facilitates the physical release of milk. It is a neuroactive signal that washes over the infant's developing brain, enhancing the neural pathways associated with attachment, trust, and social bonding. It is as if the act of feeding physically constructs the capacity for connection. In this oxytocin-rich state, the infant's brain is primed to learn, its gaze locked on the mother's face, its ears tuning to the cadence of her voice. The foundations of language itself may be laid not in the first spoken words, but in this intimate chemical dialogue. The milk, then, is a pharmacological script, programming the very hardware necessary to receive the software of culture. Could it be that our first lessons in love and language are literally imbibed? This biological transfer of wisdom finds a profound echo in the silent testimony of the past. Archaeologists, studying the microscopic wear patterns on the teeth of our early Homo sapiens ancestors, have pieced together a startling fact. These children likely nursed for 2, 3, or even more years. Imagine the scope of that prolonged proximity. For 1,000 days and more, a child would be carried, worn against the mother's body, a constant witness to her every action. This was not a period of passive dependency, but an intensive, full-immersion apprenticeship in being human. The child would feel the subtle tension in the mother's muscles as she identified an edible root, observe the precise angle of her wrist as she flaked a stone tool, and sense the alert stillness that fell over her when a predator's scent rode the wind. Knowledge was not taught. It was osmotically absorbed through the skin, through the eyes, through the shared rhythm of breath and heartbeat. The world's first classroom was the space between a mother's back and her child's chest. In this extended childhood, might we see not a delay in development, but the very crucible where our species' unique capacity for complex social learning was forged. This ancient conduit from body to mind did not vanish with the advent of modernity. It simply transformed. The modern mother, whether breastfeeding or not, remains the primary vessel through which a child initially encounters the world. The transmission is no longer solely about which berries are poisonous, but about the unspoken rules of human interaction. A mother's tone of voice as she speaks to a stranger, the micro-expression that flits across her face when a rule is broken, the way she holds her body in moments of stress or joy. These are the live data feeds a child's brain is wired to download. The knowledge of how to be a person in a specific culture is passed on not through lectures, but through a million mirrored moments. The first lessons in empathy, in fairness, in fear, are communicated in the cradle long before they are ever explained in a classroom? Is the most critical knowledge we ever receive the kind that is never formally spoken? A counterpoint arises, a whisper from a world obsessed with speed and independence. Some might argue that this prolonged period of nurturing, this deep biological and emotional entanglement, is a sign of primitiveness, a leash that holds back the potential of the individual. If efficiency were the sole metric of evolutionary success, perhaps they would be right. Yet, the historical record suggests the opposite. The very period of extended childhood and intense maternal bonding coincides with the explosive growth of human culture, art, and technology. It was not the species that matured fastest that came to dominate the planet, but the one that learned most deeply from its elders. This dependency, this seemingly slow start, appears to be our greatest evolutionary innovation. What if our strength lies not in our independence, but in the depth of our earliest dependencies? So, the milk nourishes the body, but it is the embrace, the constant, carrying, witnessing presence that nourishes the mind. The physical stream may eventually cease, but the informational river it initiated continues to flow. From those first feeds and holds, a different kind of memory begins to form, one that is not contained within a single skull. It is a collective memory built from shared gazes and synchronized heartbeats, from stories murmured into a sleepy ear. This is what defines a human childhood, setting it apart from all other creatures. It is a protected space where the collective wisdom of a generation is patiently, lovingly, poured into the next. And as the child grows, this memory seeks new vessels, new ways to be shared and solidified. For when the children finally step away from their mother's sides, they find themselves drawn to another source of warmth and light. They gather around a different hearth, not of the body, but of the community. The flames dance, casting long shadows, and an elder's voice rises and falls, weaving tales of ancestors, of great hunts, of moral failures and triumphs. The children listen, their eyes wide, and in that act of listening, the fragile, living knowledge of one generation is etched into the minds of the next. The circle around the fire becomes the second cradle, and the story told there becomes the milk of a different kind. If the mother's body was the first library, then what becomes of a people when they learn to speak their shelves aloud? The fire crackles, a tiny, contained sun against the encroaching dark. Small faces, painted in flickering shades of orange and gold, are turned upward, their eyes wide pools reflecting the flames. An elder's voice, weathered and soft as old leather, weaves a tapestry of sound, a story of heroes and monsters, of how the river came to be, of a time when animals spoke. This scene is ancient, repeated across hundreds of thousands of nights, in countless clearings, caves, and later, hearths. It is a fundamental human ritual, as instinctive as breathing. But beneath the surface of this comforting tableau lies a deeper, more urgent question. Why? Why are children, these vessels of pure potential, so magnetically drawn to and so perfectly designed for the act of storytelling? The answer begins not in the realm of culture, but in the silent, intricate architecture of the developing brain. Between the ages of 3 and 12, a child's mind is not a blank slate, but a superbly receptive, hypersensitive organ, undergoing a period of explosive neural growth and pruning. This is the golden hour for memory formation, a time when experiences are not merely recorded but etched with the emotional intensity of a first time. The brain in this stage possesses a unique plasticity. It absorbs patterns, images, and symbols with a voracious appetite, building the foundational frameworks upon which all future knowledge will rest. A frightening tale whispered in the dark can seed a primal caution of the unknown, just as a story of kindness and sharing can lay down the neural pathways for empathy. These are not just memories. They are the deep-set cornerstones of a personal worldview, laid down with the indelible mortar of childhood emotion. The stories told around that fire become part of the child's very biological fabric, a library of emotional and symbolic references that will be consulted for a lifetime. Is it possible, then, that our most enduring truths are not facts we learn, but feelings we inherit from stories told in the soft light of our youth? This biological predisposition finds its echo in the deepest corridors of our past. Archaeologists, brushing dust from ancient floors, have begun to notice a curious pattern. In the great painted caves of Europe, like Lascaux and Chauvet, the magnificent depictions of bison, horses, and lions are often accompanied by something more subtle, the small, clear footprints of children. These are not the marks of casual visitors. The footprints cluster in specific areas, suggesting repeated, purposeful presence. It seems the children were not merely passive observers dragged along on a hunt. They were active participants in the ritual. They were the ones being shown the symbols, taught the stories encoded in the art. The cave was not just a gallery, it was a classroom. The paintings were the picture books of the Paleolithic, and the children were the intended audience, their minds the living vessels chosen to carry the collective memory of the clan forward, the knowledge of which herds migrated where, which plants healed and which poisoned, which predators stalked the shadows. This was not information that could be risked to the frailties of individual adult memory. It had to be embedded in the next generation, imprinted upon their malleable consciousness through the power of narrative and symbol. Could the very survival of our species have hinged on this sacred transfer, on the ability to paint a story on a wall and, more importantly, to paint it onto the canvas of a child's mind? In the modern world, this ancient mechanism has been refined, but its core function remains unchanged. The fairy tales, folk legends, and family anecdotes told to children are far more than simple entertainment. They are the primary tools for cultural transmission, the subtle instruments that shape identity and instill shared values. A story like The Boy Who Cried Wolf is a masterclass in social contract theory, delivered not as a lecture but as a compelling drama. The sagas of grandparents, tales of migration, hardship, and resilience become the invisible threads that stitch a child into the larger tapestry of their lineage and community. Through these narratives, a child learns what their culture celebrates, what it fears, what it deems righteous or forbidden. The stories provide a moral and emotional map, a set of coordinates that help the individual navigate the complex terrain of social life long before they encounter its realities firsthand. The collective memory of a people, their triumphs, traumas, and defining myths, is not stored in history books for children, but in the stories whispered at bedtime. Are we, then, the stories we were told before we could even fully understand the words? A skeptic might point to the animal kingdom, where other species also engage in forms of teaching. A mother dolphin shows her calf how to use a sponge for foraging. A chimpanzee demonstrates the art of termite fishing. This is the transmission of practical, immediate survival skills. But human storytelling is something else entirely. We are not just teaching how to find food or avoid danger. We are transmitting a shared past, an imagined future, a set of abstract values, and a complex cultural identity. We create a socialized memory, a collective consciousness that binds individuals together across space and time. The child listening to a story about their great-grandfather's journey is not learning a technique for survival. They are learning that they are part of a story larger than themselves. Why did Homo sapiens, alone among the animals, feel this profound need to lade childhood with the weight of collective memory to turn the young into the keepers of the tribe's soul? The extended period of human childhood is the crucial enabler. It provides the necessary time for this deep cultural encoding to occur. Memory is not just stored. It is dramatized, rehearsed, and emotionally charged. The long years of dependence allow for the intricate layering of narrative upon narrative, symbol upon symbol, until the child's internal world is richly populated with the ghosts of the tribe's past. And to sustain this vast, intricate architecture of shared memory, humanity needed to invent its most powerful tool. The flickering fire, the painted cave, the elder's voice, all these were conduits. But the true engine, the innovation that allowed the collective memory to become truly collective, to escape the limits of a single generation was the evolution of a complex, nuanced, and infinitely flexible system of symbols. We had to learn not just to make sounds, but to make meaning. This raises a final, lingering thought. If childhood is the vessel and story the content, then language is the very medium that allows the transfer to happen. But what does it demand of us, this incredible tool? Other animals communicate with signals, but humans spend a decade or more in a state of profound linguistic apprenticeship. We are not just learning to label the world, but to feel the subtle nuances of a raised eyebrow, the hidden meaning in a pause, the emotional weight of a metaphor. We are learning to navigate a social world built entirely from words. This is a monumental task, one that requires a brain willing to remain open and malleable for an unusually long time. What is the true cost of this gift of gab? And what does it mean that we are a species defined by a childhood-long conversation with the voices of the past, a conversation so complex it requires us to remain students for the entirety of our youth? A young bird learns the song of its ancestors in a matter of weeks, its melody a perfect, inherited signature. A dog comes to understand the cadence of a few dozen words, its world mapped by a handful of urgent sounds. Walk, food, no. But a human child? They embark on a journey that spans half a decade, a full decade or more, just to achieve a basic fluency in the single, sprawling ecosystem of their native tongue. Why is this process so uniquely, astonishingly long? What profound transaction is taking place in the silent, developing theater of the mind during all those years of babbling, stumbling, and gradual mastery? This is not merely the acquisition of a tool, it is the slow, deliberate construction of a universe. The answer begins not with culture, but with biology, written in the intricate folds of the human brain. We are born with two regions primed for this monumental task. Broca's area, the architect of speech production, and Wernicke's area, the interpreter of meaning. Yet unlike the pre-programmed circuitry of a songbird, these areas in a human infant are not finished. They are vast, unexplored territories, their neural pathways not yet paved. Their development is a slow, deliberate symphony that plays on well into adolescence. This extended timeline is the first clue. The human brain is not just downloading a vocabulary list. It is engaged in a far more ambitious project. It is learning to discern the invisible skeleton of grammar, the rules that govern how words combine to create meaning from chaos. It is calibrating itself to the subtle music of intonation, where a shift in pitch can turn a statement into a question, a compliment into an insult. It is learning to navigate the shadowy realms of implication, metaphor, and nuance, to understand that "it's a bit chilly in here" is rarely just a report on the temperature. This deep structural understanding requires years of immersion, a constant unconscious experimentation with sound and sense. The brain is not a simple recorder. It is a scientist, tirelessly forming hypotheses, testing them against the feedback of the world, and refining its model of reality. Could it be that this lengthy apprenticeship is the very price of our capacity for abstract thought? To appreciate the singularity of this human endeavor, we can look back through the deep time of our own lineage. The archaeological record offers a tantalizing silent clue: the hyoid bone. This delicate, horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat is a cornerstone of sophisticated speech, anchoring the muscles that allow for the precise control of the tongue and larynx. Neanderthals, our robust, intelligent cousins, possessed a hyoid bone virtually identical to our own. They had the physical capacity for complex vocalization. They likely communicated with a rich and nuanced system of sounds, but they left behind no cave paintings teeming with symbolic narratives, no carvings that speak of myth or identity. Their world, for all its intelligence, appears bounded by the immediate. Then came Homo sapiens. We too had the hyoid bone, but we coupled it with an explosive, unprecedented capacity for symbolic thinking. Language, for us, became more than a tool for coordinating a hunt or signaling danger. It became a vessel for culture, a way to package the knowledge of one generation and pass it intact to the next. We began to speak of things that were not present, of past hunts and future fears, of spirits in the wind and stories in the stars. This was the great leap. The long childhood of language learning was no longer a biological burden, but a cultural necessity, the essential period in which a new mind is woven into the collective tapestry of its people. Was the development of language, then, not just an adaptation for survival, but the ignition of a self-perpetuating cultural engine? In our modern, hyper-connected society, the burden on this ancient learning system has only intensified. A child today must master not one, but multiple layers of language. There is the spoken word, of course, but also the written word, an artificial and demanding technology that must be painstakingly mapped onto the spoken system. They must learn to decipher the unspoken grammar of social interaction, the subtle dance of body language, and the ever-shifting landscape of online communication, where emojis stand in for facial expressions and tone is a constant minefield of misinterpretation. Most profoundly, language ceases to be merely a tool for communication and becomes the very medium of thought. We think in words. We reason with an internal monologue. Our memories are often stored as narratives. The language we learn fundamentally shapes the way we perceive and categorize the world. A child learning the countless words for snow in an Inuit language is not just learning vocabulary. They are learning to see the world in a more granular, specific way. The long years of acquisition are the years in which the mind's own operating system is being installed. Is it possible that we are not just teaching our children how to speak, but how to be? This leads to a paradoxical question, a challenge from the ruthless logic of evolution. If this system is so cumbersome, so energetically expensive, requiring such a vulnerable and extended period of development, why did nature not select for a simpler, more efficient model? Why not a system of 30 distinct calls, perfectly adequate for signaling predators, food, and mating status? The very persistence of this complexity suggests that its cost is outweighed by a monumental reward. The complexity is not a bug. It is the feature. The ability to construct a conditional clause, if the river freezes, we can cross, allows for planning and strategy far beyond any other creature. The capacity for metaphor, time is a river, allows for the understanding of abstract concepts. The gift of narrative allows us to create shared identities and common purpose. The payoff for our long childhood is a mind that can escape the prison of the present moment, that can travel backwards in memory and forwards in imagination. The complexity of language is the price of our freedom. But what is the nature of that freedom if the very tools that grant it also inevitably shape the walls of our perception? We often think of language learning as a one-way street, the adult world imparting knowledge into the waiting, empty vessel of the child's mind. But watch a child at play, and you will see this is only half the story. The child is not a passive recipient. They are an active, often rebellious, co-creator. They take the linguistic bricks they are given and build castles the architects never imagined. They twist words, invent new ones, ask questions that defy simple answers. Why can't we see the wind? If a fly has 6 legs, is it wearing 3 pairs of pants? This is not a failure to grasp the rules. It is the beginning of a dialogue with the rules. The child learns the grammar of reality, and then immediately starts writing poetry with it. They use language not just to describe the world, but to invent new ones in the backyard, to fuyu life and voice to stuffed animals, to navigate the intricate social landscapes of their own making. This creative rebellion is the engine of cultural renewal. Each generation learns the language of the past, but in their mouths, it becomes the language of the future. They bend it, stretch it, and fill it with new meaning. The long, slow process of learning is, therefore, also a long, slow process of incubation. The mind is not just being filled, it is being prepared to reshape the very world it is learning to describe. So, We do not merely learn in order to speak. We speak in order to learn. And when the words we are given finally feel insufficient for the worlds we feel burgeoning inside, we simply begin to invent new ones. Is the ultimate purpose of language, then, not to describe reality, but to provide the tools for its endless recreation? A child stacks wooden blocks into a precarious tower, a castle of their own design. Another drapes a blanket over a chair, transforming a mundane living room into the cockpit of a starship. To an adult eye, this is play, a simple diversion from the serious business of growing up. But what if we are witnessing something far more ancient, a fundamental impulse etched into our biology? Is this mere mischief, or is it the very engine of our species' ascent? A profound evolutionary behavior in its purest form? The answer might lie not in the outcome of the play, but in the quiet storm of activity inside the developing brain. Neuroscientists have mapped a fascinating network that becomes particularly vibrant during childhood, especially between the ages of 4 and 12. They call it the default mode network. While other parts of the brain are busy processing immediate sensory input or controlling movement, this network lights up when the mind is at rest, drifting freely. It is the physiological seat of daydreaming, of introspection, of weaving together disparate threads of memory and perception. This is the neural landscape where a stick can become a sword, and a puddle can become an ocean. It is a biological mandate for imagination, a cradle of creativity built into our very wiring. The child is not just avoiding boredom. They are exercising a cognitive muscle essential to being human. Their brain, in its most plastic and formative stage, is practicing the art of connection, of seeing the world not only for what it is, but for all that it could be. This impulse to recreate the world is not a modern luxury. The archaeological record whispers this truth from the depths of prehistory. We find, alongside the functional flint tools of adults, the creative artifacts of children. A small, carefully chipped piece of stone that serves no practical purpose for hunting or scraping. Perhaps it was a toy, a miniature version made by a child learning through imitation. But we also find something more. Animal figurines carved from bone or wood, patterns scratched into clay, arrangements of shells and stones that hint at symbolic thought. These are not mere copies of adult tools. They are early expressions of a world reinterpreted. They suggest that even in societies focused on sheer survival, space was made for the young mind to experiment, to bend reality to its will. The child of the Paleolithic era sitting by the fire was not just being taught which berries were poisonous. They were also, perhaps, shaping a lump of clay into the form of a bison, externalizing an internal vision, and in doing so, laying the groundwork for the art and religion that would come to define their culture. The act of creation was, it seems, as fundamental to childhood as the act of learning. In our modern world, this drive manifests with startling clarity. A child does not simply accept the world as it is presented to them. They imagine a better one, a fairer one, and they often impose this creative thinking onto reality itself. They hold a trial for a stuffed animal who broke an imaginary rule, complete with a defense attorney and a merciful judge. They draw a picture of their family with everyone smiling, even on a difficult day, willing a happier reality into existence. This is more than charming naivete. It is the precursor to invention, to social reform, to critical thought. The engineer who redesigns an inefficient system was once a child rebuilding a block tower to make it taller and more stable. The artist who captures a new perspective on beauty was once a child seeing a dragon in the clouds. This period of life is a protected space for cognitive experimentation, where the consequences of failure are low, but the potential for discovery is infinite. The world is a laboratory, and play is the methodology. Yet a pragmatic question arises, a whisper from our deep past. If the primary evolutionary goal of childhood is to learn the skills necessary for survival, to hunt, to build shelter, to navigate social hierarchies, then why devote so much precious time and energy to something as seemingly frivolous as creativity? Why daydream when you could be practicing your aim? The very length of human childhood, a prolonged period of dependency unlike that of any other animal, suggests an answer. This extended vulnerability is not a flaw, but a feature. It is the necessary fertile ground, the fallow field, where creativity can take root and grow without the immediate pressure of utility. Survival is not just about replicating what works. It is about adapting when what works fails. The child who has spent years mentally rearranging the world, who has practiced solving problems that don't yet exist, is the adult who can innovate in the face of a new ice age, a pandemic, or a social collapse. The capacity to imagine alternatives is, in the long run, the most sophisticated survival tool we possess. Is it possible, then, that our long childhoods and our powerful brains evolved in a symbiotic dance, each demanding the other, all for the purpose of granting us this unique power to reinvent our reality? So, we begin to see that childhood is far more than an apprenticeship in imitation. It is a unique and protected epoch, the only time in our lives when we are granted a profound license to try, to err, and to reconstruct the world from the ground up. It is a rehearsal for a future we cannot predict, conducted with the materials of the present. The castle of blocks will be knocked down, the starship will be dismantled when dinner is called, but the cognitive pathways forged in their creation remain. They form the foundation for all the art, science, and philosophy that will follow. But this entire delicate architecture of creativity, this brave space to experiment, rests upon a fragile, essential cornerstone. It cannot exist in a vacuum of fear or uncertainty. The child must feel safe enough to imagine. And this safety is born from a simple, yet monumental, psychological contract. The courage to build a new world, it turns out, first requires a fundamental belief in the one that already exists. For the child to boldly reimagine the universe, they must first trust that the ground beneath their feet will not give way, that the hands that feed them will not withdraw. This trust is the silent pact between generations, the invisible scaffold upon which the castle of imagination is built. But what is the nature of this trust, and what does its presence, or its absence, truly forge in the human spirit? Imagine the moment you are a child, standing on the edge of a step just a little too high for you. You close your eyes, take a breath, and leap into the empty air. There is no calculation of distance, no analysis of physics, only the unshakable certainty that arms will be there to catch you. You do not fall, you are received. Children are not born with knowledge, but with an innate capacity for trust. It is their first and most vital tool for learning, the invisible scaffold upon which all understanding will be built. But why is this fragile, emotional state so fundamental to the very architecture of human intelligence? What if trust is not a social nicety, but a biological imperative, woven into our DNA as the prerequisite for everything we become? The answer begins not in the classroom, but in the unfinished landscape of the infant brain. A newborn's mind is a world of raw, unfiltered sensation, a place where neural pathways are still being carved by experience. Crucial regions like the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational judgment and risk assessment, are remarkably underdeveloped. The amygdala, an ancient alarm bell for danger, is present, but its wiring is crude, its signals unrefined. A baby cannot yet discern a genuine threat from a sudden shadow. Into this neurological void steps a powerful chemical solution. Oxytocin, often called the bonding molecule, it floods the system during moments of close contact. A mother's gaze, a father's soothing voice, a gentle touch. This biochemical cascade does more than just create a feeling of warmth. It forges the first link in a chain of trust. The child's developing brain, unable to logically evaluate its caretakers, instead downloads an emotional program. Safety is not a deduced fact, but a felt sense, a physiological state orchestrated by those who hold them. They learn to trust the world because their body has been taught to feel safe within it. This is the cradle of all curiosity. Could it be that our first lessons are not taught but felt, written in the silent language of hormones and heartbeats? This biological need for trust did not emerge in a vacuum. It is an ancient echo from the plains where our ancestors took their first steps. Archaeological evidence from early Homo sapiens sites suggests a social structure far different from the nuclear family ideal of recent centuries. Life was precarious, survival hinged on cooperation. In these small, nomadic bands, a child was not solely the responsibility of its biological parents. The fossil record and studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies point to a practice known as alloparenting, literally, other parenting. Grandmothers, aunts, uncles, older siblings, and even unrelated members of the group all played a role in nurturing the young. A child would be passed from lap to lap, fed by many hands, soothed by many voices. This was not merely a matter of practical childcare. It was a profound social curriculum. In this extended web of care, a child learned that trust could be distributed. They learned to read the intentions of different individuals, to build bonds beyond a single primary attachment. This network of reliable others became the foundation for the larger-scale cooperation that would define our species. The trust learned in the safety of the campfire circle was the same trust required for a coordinated hunt or a shared defense. Was the village, then, not just a community for living, but a classroom for believing? In our modern world, this ancient blueprint still holds true. Illuminated by the lens of psychology, we now understand that a child's cognitive development is inextricably linked to their emotional security. The famous strange situation experiments in developmental psychology reveal that children with secure attachments, those who trust in the consistent availability of their caregiver, are more willing to explore their environment. They use their caregiver as a secure base from which to venture forth, to touch, to question, to experiment. When they stumble, they know where to return for comfort. This cycle of exploration and return is the very engine of learning. Trust in the teacher, whether a parent or a professor, opens the neural gates for knowledge absorption. It allows a child to risk being wrong, to ask a foolish question, to fail at a task without the fear of abandonment or shame. This emotional safety is the fertile ground in which moral reasoning also takes root, as children internalize the values and empathy modeled by those they trust. But does this essential vulnerability, this beautiful dependence, also contain a latent danger? If a child's mind is so perfectly designed to absorb the world through the filter of trust, what happens when that trust is misplaced or weaponized? This is the inherent paradox of faith. The very mechanism that allows a child to leap fearlessly into the arms of a parent is the same mechanism that can make them susceptible to manipulation, to dogma, to abuse. The open system, optimized for receiving care and guidance, has no built-in firewall against malice or neglect. The lullaby that soothes can also be the voice that deceives. The arms that catch can also be the hands that harm. This vulnerability is not a design flaw, but the shadow side of our greatest strength. It raises an unsettling question. Is the capacity for trust also the capacity for our greatest betrayals? Does the cradle, by its very nature, imply the potential for the club? Perhaps this deep-seated vulnerability is the very reason our species evolved beyond a simple parent-offspring bond. The model of alloparenting, of the village raising the child, may have been nature's elegant solution to this dilemma. By distributing the responsibility of care across a network, the child's world of trust becomes more resilient. If one link in the chain fails, others remain. The child learns that safety is not monolithic, that it can be found in many places. This collective nurturing does not dilute trust, but rather diversifies it, creating a safety net that is far harder to tear. It suggests that the ultimate expression of caring for a child is not to be their sole source of truth, but to be a guide who introduces them to a world full of other reliable guides. The journey of learning, then, begins with a single blind leap of faith, but its continuation relies on building a community of catchers. And so we are left to wonder, if trust is the foundation upon which we build all understanding, who else must stand with us to ensure that foundation holds? It takes a village to raise a child. We've all heard the phrase, a comforting platitude that speaks to communal support. But what if we've misunderstood its true weight? What if this wasn't just a pleasant suggestion, but the fundamental, non-negotiable blueprint for our species' survival? For hundreds of thousands of years, this village wasn't a metaphor. It was the very cradle in which humanity was forged. The question hangs in the air, simple yet profound. Why did our ancestors need so many hands, so many watchful eyes, just to raise one fragile, helpless infant? The answer begins not in the social world, but deep within our biology, in a reproductive paradox that sets us apart from our closest primate relatives. Consider the chimpanzee. A mother will nurse her infant for 4 to 5 years, a period during which she does not ovulate. Her entire being, her physiological resources, are dedicated to that single offspring until it is largely independent. Human females, in stark contrast, can conceive again while still nursing a toddler. This shorter interbirth interval is a biological gamble of immense proportions. A human infant is born spectacularly underdeveloped, its brain a mere quarter of its eventual size, a bundle of raw potential demanding constant, exhausting care. To have another one so soon would seem to be a recipe for disaster, stretching the mother's physical and emotional resources to a breaking point. This is where the village enters the equation, not as a kindness, but as a necessity. This practice, known to science as alloparenting, care provided by individuals other than the biological parents, was the ingenious solution. The grandmother who shared gathered fruits, the aunt who carried the baby, the uncle who provided protection, the older child who helped watch over the younger, each was a vital link in a chain of survival. This cooperative breeding strategy allowed for our uniquely rapid reproductive pace, turning a potential liability into an evolutionary advantage. Could it be that our very fertility, our ability to populate the planet, was purchased with the currency of communal care? The stones themselves whisper of this ancient childcare network. At sites like Çatalhöyük, a Neolithic settlement in Turkey, archaeologists find homes clustered together like a honeycomb, with no streets between them. Movement was across the rooftops, a physical layout that forced constant interaction. Here, in these cramped, intimate quarters, the bones tell a story. The remains of the elderly, often showing signs of arthritis and worn joints, are found nestled alongside the young. It is not difficult to imagine an old woman, her hands gnarled from a lifetime of grinding grain, now using those same hands to gently rock a cradle, telling stories to wide-eyed children while their mothers worked. Far to the north, at the Upper Paleolithic site of Sungir in Russia, a dramatic burial reveals more. A man, 2 children, and an older adult were laid to rest with astonishing ceremony, adorned with thousands of ivory beads. The inclusion of an older individual in this prestigious grave suggests a status derived not from physical prowess, but from wisdom, from a role that the community deemed essential. Were these the revered elders, the keepers of stories and skills, the first teachers? This intergenerational transfer of knowledge, how to knap a flint, which plants were poisonous, where the migrating herds would pass, was as critical as food itself. In a world of sharp edges and hungry predators, a child left solely to its parents' care was a vulnerable child. The village was a living shield, a distributed brain, a safety net woven from many lives. Is our deep-seated, almost universal reverence for elders a faint echo of this ancient practical dependence? This ancestral model finds a powerful echo in the quiet findings of modern psychology. Study after study suggests that children raised in multi-generational households or within tight-knit communities often exhibit greater emotional resilience, stronger social skills, and a more robust sense of identity. The constant, varied interactions with different caregivers, each with their own temperaments, their own stories, their own patience, provide a richer, more complex social curriculum. The pressure is diffused. A child's frustration is not always directed at a single, exhausted mother, but can be soothed by a grandfather's calm presence or distracted by a cousin's game. The knowledge is not a single stream from parent to child, but a delta, branching and spreading, carrying the sediments of different experiences. This shared caregiving acts as a buffer against tragedy. If a parent is lost, the child is not cast adrift. The village remains. In this light, the intense, isolated nuclear family of contemporary society appears not as a norm, but as a radical and recent experiment. Why, then, have so many of us willingly retreated into silos, where parents are expected to be all things: chefs, chauffeurs, therapists, playmates, often without a support system? Are we, in our pursuit of independence and privacy, quietly working against a deeply ingrained evolutionary instinct for connection? Has the very structure of modern life, for all its comforts, created a silent famine of communal nurture? If a child needs a whole community to grow, then perhaps the long, slow arc of human childhood is not a biological flaw, but a masterful design for building cooperation. This extended period of dependency is not merely about the brain growing larger. It is about the mind being woven into a social fabric. It is the time required to learn not just how to hunt, but how to share the meat. Not just how to speak, but how to listen to the nuances of a myth told by firelight. And from this crucible of communal living, from the constant gentle pressure of many hands and many voices, something else emerges: ritual. The child is not merely fed and protected, it is recognized, named, and initiated. The village does not just raise a biological organism, it welcomes a new person into the world of meaning. This transition from mere survival to significance is where the story deepens, where the physical act of caring blends into the spiritual act of belonging. Across the ancient world, in the deepest caves and on the oldest artifacts, we find them. The children, a small clay figurine of a boy, crafted by hands long turned to dust, the faint outline of a girl's form painted on a rock shelter wall, dancing, the tiny unmistakable prints of a child's feet pressed into the soft clay of a cave floor millennia ago, preserved as if they had just run by. These are not accidents. They are deliberate inclusions, whispers from the past telling us that childhood was never just a biological stage to be endured. It was, and perhaps is, a potent cultural symbol, a bridge between the present and the future, between the mundane and the sacred. What profound truth were our ancestors acknowledging when they made room for a child's footprint in their most holy places? Why is it that the smallest members of our societies, those who have yet to build a house, fight a battle, or contribute to the harvest, are so often the central figures in our most profound rituals? From the joyous naming ceremonies that welcome a newborn to the chilling archaeological evidence of child sacrifice, humanity has consistently placed the child at the heart of the sacred. They are economic dependents, a net drain on resources in their early years. And yet, we drape them in symbolic weight, building elaborate rites around their existence. This paradox whispers a deeper truth, that the value of a child cannot be measured in labor, but in something far more essential to the survival of the group. Perhaps, in the silent language of ritual, a society does not just care for its young, it speaks to itself through them, about its own hopes, fears, and the very source of its continued life. The foundation of this ritualistic focus may be written in the very architecture of the developing brain. From the moment of birth, an infant's mind is not a blank slate, but a hypersensitive receiver tuned to a specific frequency, the frequency of community. It is designed to lock onto the rhythmic patterns of a lullaby, the exaggerated contours of a parent's smile, the synchronized chanting of a ceremony. This is not passive reception, but active, biological programming. The neural pathways that will govern social bonding, empathy, and cultural learning are being forged in the fire of these early, repetitive experiences. A ritual, with its predictable sequences and heightened emotions, provides a powerful scaffold for this construction. The flickering torchlight in a dark cave, the steady drumbeat that vibrates in a tiny chest, the collective gaze of the tribe upon the child. These are not mere background details. They are the primary curriculum. They teach, before words ever can, the fundamental lesson of belonging, the feeling of being part of something larger than oneself, a sensation we spend our lives either chasing or fleeing, finds its origin point here, in these staged, symbolic introductions to the world. Is it possible, then, that our ceremonies for the young are so pervasive because they answer a deep biological imperative, cementing the human connection at the most plastic and vulnerable stage of life? This biological impulse leaves its mark on history, etched not in soft tissue, but in stone and bone. The ruins of ancient cities tell stories that are often silent on the details of daily life, but shout about the significance of the child in the spiritual realm. In the vast metropolis of Teotihuacan, outside modern-day Mexico City, the skeletons of children were carefully interred at the corners of the mighty Pyramid of the Sun, their bodies becoming literal foundations for the city's most sacred structure. They were not discarded. They were placed with intention, as if their presence could anchor the temple to the earth and the gods. Across the ocean in the Tophet of Carthage, small funerary urns contain the cremated remains of infants, accompanied by inscribed dedications to the deities Tanit and Baal-Hamon. The debate rages among archaeologists. Was this widespread sacrifice or a special cemetery for children who died naturally? Yet even in the more benign interpretation, the ritualization is undeniable. The child's passage from life to death was ceremoniously mediated by the community and offered to the highest powers. In these acts, whether foundational or sacrificial, the child is transformed from an individual into a symbol. They become a vessel for the community's plea for fertility, for stability, for divine favor. The child's body becomes a text upon which the anxieties and aspirations of an entire culture are written. What does it say about a society when its most potent offering, the gift it believes its gods will value most, is its own future? In our modern, seemingly secular world, we have not abandoned this template. We have simply reframed it. The starkness of ancient altars has been replaced by the bright decorations of a first birthday party, but the underlying structure remains remarkably consistent. A child's first day of school is a modern ritual of immense power. The new uniform, the oversized backpack, the photograph on the doorstep. It is a rite of passage, not just for the child, but for the family and the community. It is a collective affirmation that this young person is now being formally integrated into a larger social system. The ceremony of a graduation years later serves as the bookend, publicly acknowledging the successful completion of this phase of integration. These events are not just personal milestones, they are performances that reinforce the social contract. They announce that this new member is seen, their presence is noted, and their place within the hierarchy is being established. The society, through its rituals, is bending down to look the child in the eye and saying, "You are one of us." In doing so, it reaffirms its own identity and its commitment to continuity. Could it be that our need to ritualize childhood is a way of mastering the anxiety of time itself, of creating order and meaning around the chaotic and mysterious process of growing up? This very need presents a compelling counter-argument to a purely utilitarian view of human organization. If children were merely burdens, would we not minimize their cultural footprint until they could earn their keep? The fact that we do the opposite, that we invest immense emotional and symbolic capital into them, suggests that the ritual itself is the work. The act of performing ceremony for a child is how a society actively constructs the child's value. It is a public declaration that this dependent, this gan-nang, or burden, is in fact the center of gravity for the community's regeneration. The child represents pure potential, a chance to correct the errors of the past and to carry the best of the present into the future. The ritual is the mechanism by which this abstract potential is made tangible and sacred. It is the community's way of investing in its own immortality. So, the question shifts. Is the ritual for the child's benefit, or is the child for the ritual's benefit? Are we protecting them, or are we, through them, protecting an idea of ourselves that is worth perpetuating? When a society chooses to ritualize its children, it does more than celebrate growth. It acknowledges that childhood is the furnace in which the social world is remade. The long, protected period of immaturity is not an evolutionary mistake or a simple delay before productivity. It is a necessary fertile void, a time of intense learning and neural connection that allows for the transmission of increasingly complex culture. This extended childhood demands a corresponding investment from the group, an investment that is expressed and reinforced through ceremony. The rituals are the visible sign of this profound biological and social bargain. And this bargain leads us to a fascinating correlation, one that stretches beyond the human sphere and into the animal kingdom, prompting us to consider if the very length of childhood itself is not a cost, but a brilliant, demanding strategy for a different kind of intelligence. If the ritualization of childhood is a universal human theme, a deep-seated response to the needs of a cultural species, then perhaps the specific length of that childhood is equally significant. What if the duration of this vulnerable, learning-saturated phase is not arbitrary, but is intimately tied to the cognitive power of the species itself? The human child remains dependent for years, a fact that shapes our entire social existence. But we are not alone in this. In the grand tapestry of life, a pattern emerges, subtle yet persistent, linking the luxury of a long youth to the spark of a formidable mind. Consider the dolphin, a creature of fluid grace and undeniable intelligence, playing in the ocean's depths. Its games are not mere instinct. They are complex, social, and can last for years. Or the elephant, a being of immense memory and deep emotion, whose calves remain under the watchful, teaching care of their mothers and the entire matriarchal herd for over a decade. And then there is the chimpanzee, our close cousin, whose young learn the intricate rules of politics and tool use through a long and protected adolescence. What strange thread connects these minds, celebrated as the brightest on earth after our own? It is an unexpected commonality, an unusually long, vulnerable, and dependent childhood. Is this extended period of youth not a biological burden, but rather the very crucible in which intelligence is forged? Could the slow, meandering path of childhood be an evolutionary law written in the language of time and learning? The biological ledger seems to support this idea. For most of the animal kingdom, the strategy is speed. A baby wildebeest must stand and run within minutes of birth, its brain largely pre-programmed for a life of grazing and flight. Its childhood is a brief, frantic sprint toward independence. But for a select few, evolution has chosen a different path, a marathon. A long childhood is a luxury purchased at a great cost. It demands more energy from parents, exposes the young to predators for longer, and delays their contribution to the gene pool. So, what is the payoff? The answer lies in the brain, specifically the neocortex, the wrinkled outer layer associated with higher-order thinking, reasoning, and consciousness. In species with large neocortices, the brain is simply too large and complex to be fully formed at birth. The skull must be soft and malleable to pass through the birth canal, meaning much of the brain's wiring happens out in the open, in the world. This extended period of postnatal development is not a flaw. It is a feature. It allows the brain to remain a dynamic, unfinished project, its neural pathways shaped not just by genetic code, but by experience. Every game of chase, every problem solved, every social bond formed physically sculpts the developing neural architecture. The long childhood is nature's way of providing a sandbox for the brain, a protected time where trial and error are not fatal, but educational. It is a trade-off. Instead of hardwired instincts, the reward is behavioral flexibility, an ability to adapt to an environment that is itself unpredictable and ever-changing. But if this is the blueprint, where can we see its most profound application? The fossil record tells a slow, deliberate story of our own becoming, written in the bones of our ancestors. From the early toolmakers, Homo habilis, to the nomadic Homo erectus, and finally to us, Homo sapiens, a clear trend emerges: the gradual elongation of childhood. The skeletons of young hominins show changes in dental development and bone growth, indicating that with each step toward greater intelligence and cultural complexity, the period of youth stretched. This was not a random occurrence. The invention of ever more sophisticated stone tools, the controlled use of fire, the emergence of symbolic thought and language. These were not skills that could be inscribed in DNA alone. They required time to learn, to practice, to pass down. A long childhood became the necessary corridor through which culture could flow from one generation to the next. It allowed for the accumulation of knowledge, for the slow baking of tradition and technique in the oven of time. The individual who spent years learning to nap a perfect spearhead, to read the tracks of prey, or to understand the nuances of a clan's social hierarchy was, in the end, far more equipped for survival than one relying on instinct alone. The brain's potential was vast, but that potential was meaningless without the years required to unlock it. Intelligence, then, seems to be inextricably linked to this extended apprenticeship to life. But what happens when this ancient evolutionary strategy collides with the dizzying complexity of the modern world? Today, human childhood is longer than it has ever been. We have institutionalized this extended period of dependence into a decades-long journey of formal education, social development, and psychological maturation. A child in the 21st century is not simply learning to hunt or gather. They are learning to code, to decipher historical narratives, to navigate a globalized digital society. This is not an indulgence. It is a reflection of the world we have built. Learning is no longer a privilege or a leisurely pursuit. It is a condition for survival. The skills required to thrive are so abstract, so layered, that they demand every second of that extended childhood. Our social and technological environment has become the ultimate curriculum, and our long youth is the minimum enrollment period. We are the species that decided the best way to prepare for life is to spend a quarter of it in preparation, constantly adding new chapters to the instruction manual of being human. Yet, this grand bargain, this trade of immediate self-sufficiency for long-term intellectual power, carries a profound and often unspoken cost. For the undeniable flip side of a long childhood is prolonged vulnerability. The very openness that allows for learning also creates a capacity for deep wounding. The brain that is so adept at absorbing language and love is equally susceptible to absorbing trauma and fear. The years spent in dependence can foster resilience, but they can also breed helplessness. The system relies entirely on the care and wisdom of the previous generation. What happens when that care is absent, or that wisdom is flawed? We have exchanged the sturdy, predictable instincts of the wildebeest for a magnificent but fragile mind that takes years to assemble and can be shattered in an instant. So, we are left with a paradox. Is intelligence worth the price of such inherent fragility? Does our greatest strength contain the seed of our greatest weakness? Perhaps the answer lies not in seeing this fragility as a flaw, but as the necessary space for something extraordinary to occur. The slow growth of the human body allows the brain to focus its resources on constructing capacities that no other creature possesses in such abundance. Abstract thought, ethical reasoning, and the intricate architecture of language. These are not traits passed down neatly in our genes. They are legacies that must be built, word by word, idea by idea, in the protected sanctuary of youth. The reward for this deliberate slowness is the ability to conceive of gods, to ponder infinity, to feel the weight of history, and to write a poem. The long childhood is the cradle of culture, the period where we receive everything that makes us more than the sum of our biological parts. It is the vessel for all that is not inherited, but bestowed. And so, we are left to wonder, if our intelligence is the prize for this extended vulnerability, what might we, in our rush toward adulthood, be leaving behind in that sacred, vanishing space of childhood? The toddler's hand darts out, snatching a brightly colored block from the grasp of another. For a moment, there is only the triumph of possession, a gleam of victory in their eyes. Then, a shift. Their gaze falls upon the playmate's crumpling face, the welling tears. The stolen block feels suddenly heavy. A small frown appears. The triumphant gleam extinguishes, replaced by a confused distress. A tiny sob escapes, not from the victim, but from the thief. No one has yet taught the complex word guilt, yet the child is clearly experiencing its raw, primitive architecture. Where does this nascent sense of right and wrong come from? Is it whispered by society, or is it a faint, ancient echo, programmed into the very core of our being? This quiet drama in the sandbox is, in fact, the opening scene of humanity's most profound story, the forging of a moral self. The foundation of this story appears to be laid remarkably early, etched into our biology with the fine tools of evolution. Long before a child can articulate a principle or follow a command, they demonstrate a surprising sensitivity to fairness and the emotional states of others. In laboratories, infants as young as 12 months old will spontaneously reach for a dropped clothespin, struggling to return it to a fumbling researcher. They will offer a piece of their food, not out of obedience, but from a seemingly innate impulse to engage and assist. These are not learned behaviors. They are emergent properties, like a sapling reaching for the sun. Studies of very young children show they will consistently choose to reward a puppet that has helped another, while expressing displeasure towards a puppet that has been a hinderer. This suggests a deep-seated, pre-linguistic template for social cooperation, a biological cradle for morality that ensured our ancestors, living in fragile, interdependent bands, could survive. It was the unspoken rule that the group who shared food and cared for its vulnerable had a better chance of enduring the long, cold night. Could it be that our first moral intuitions are not commandments from on high, but the quiet, persistent hum of evolutionary success? This biological whisper finds a powerful echo in the silent testimony of the deep past. Archaeological sites from tens of thousands of years ago reveal skeletons that tell stories not of strength, but of profound vulnerability. There are remains of individuals who lived for years with severe disabilities, a withered limb, a crippling spinal condition, a healed skull fracture that would have left them blind or cognitively impaired. In a world defined by the brutal calculus of survival of the fittest, such individuals would have been a stark liability. Yet, the evidence is clear. They were not abandoned. They were fed, protected, and cared for by their community over long periods. This is not merely survival, this is compassion. It is the fossilized imprint of a moral choice, a collective, understanding that some bonds transcend mere utility. The care for the weak and the injured is a signature of a group that has moved beyond a simple pack mentality into something more complex, more humane. It suggests that the toddler's distress at a playmate's tears is not a modern invention of soft living, but an ancient, hardwired legacy. Does the long childhood of our species exist, then, not just to learn skills, but to practice this fundamental life-preserving empathy? Yet, if the blueprint is innate, the architectural details are furnished entirely by the world the child inhabits. Childhood is the long, slow river into which the tributaries of culture, family, and society flow. A child does not learn ethics from a textbook. They absorb it through their skin, through 1,000 daily observations and imitations. They are masterful, unconscious anthropologists studying the subtle laws of their tribe. They watch how a parent speaks to a stranger, how a conflict over a parking space is resolved, whether an apology sounds genuine or hollow. They internalize the values demonstrated, not just those preached. The distinction between self and other, between mine and yours, between fair and unfair, is sculpted through endless social interactions, through the shared joy of a game, the sting of exclusion, the complex negotiation of a playdate. This period of prolonged dependence is not a passive waiting room for adulthood. It is an active, intense workshop where the raw material of innate empathy is shaped into a specific moral code. But this raises the unsettling paradox. If morality is so malleable, so dependent on the models provided, can we truly call it innate? Or is the biological impulse merely a blank slate, a vague potential waiting to be written upon, for good or for ill, by the accidents of birth and culture? This is the central tension of childhood, the quiet war between nature's blueprint and nurture's relentless construction. Is the long human childhood a gentle process of sculpting, where a pre-existing form is revealed with care, or is it a more deterministic programming, where the child's software is installed by its environment? Perhaps the question itself is a false dichotomy. Perhaps the innate and the learned are not opposing forces but dance partners, locked in a continuous, intricate waltz throughout our early years. The biological impulse provides the melody, the capacity for empathy, the distress at unfairness, while culture and experience provide the rhythm and the steps. A child may be born with the capacity for guilt, but what triggers that guilt, taking a toy, or failing to show proper deference to an elder, is a lesson taught by its particular world. Regardless of its origin, the outcome of this long apprenticeship is a profound transformation. The child gradually develops an internal compass, a voice that speaks of should and should not. This is more than just memorizing rules. It is the birth of a narrative self, an individual who exists not just in the present moment, but along a timeline of past actions and future consequences. The ability to feel guilt about a past misdeed requires a memory that can project backward. The ability to choose a right action that may have an immediate cost requires a mind that can project forward, imagining a future state of social harmony or personal integrity. In this way, the development of morality is inextricably linked to the development of a new kind of consciousness. The moral sense, once awakened, forces the mind out of the eternal, impulsive present of infancy and into the flowing stream of time. If we can judge our past and guide our future based on an abstract code of conduct, then we have begun to master time itself. But what happens when this nascent, time-aware self is suddenly hurled into the storm of biological and neurological upheaval? What new questions arise when the carefully built moral framework of childhood is challenged from within? The quiet, methodical construction of the moral self in childhood sets the stage for its most dramatic test. The workshop of early life, with its steady rhythms and imposed structures, is only the first act. The scaffolding of rules and values, so diligently absorbed, is about to be shaken to its foundations by a force of nature that is both destructive and creative, a period where the very concept of a stable self is thrown into beautiful, terrifying chaos. A child's question hangs in the air, simple and profound. How long until my birthday? Or, why can't I remember yesterday? To an adult, these are queries about measurement and memory. But to the child, they are the first tentative explorations of a vast and invisible ocean, the ocean of time. Is childhood, then, the quiet harbor where we first learn to build our little boats, to understand the currents and the tides that will carry us for the rest of our lives? The architecture of a young brain is a landscape under constant, rapid construction. Deep within the temporal lobes, the hippocampus is one of the last regions to mature, a slow-blooming flower in the garden of the mind. This small, seahorse-shaped structure is the librarian of our personal timeline, the curator who files memories away with a timestamp, allowing us to retrieve them in sequence. Before the age of 4, this library is more of a vibrant, chaotic gallery. Experiences are stored as intense flashes of color and emotion, the warmth of a blanket, the taste of a favorite food, the sharp fear of a loud noise. But they lack the neat labels of yesterday or last summer. A child lives in a perpetual, expanding present, a series of nows that are rich with sensation but unanchored to a linear past. The very concept of yesterday is a foreign country they have visited but cannot yet map. Is this why early memories feel like fragments of a dream, vivid but disconnected, washed up on the shores of a consciousness that was not yet built to contain them in order? If the brain provides the biological cradle for our sense of time, then culture provides the first clock. Long before written calendars, our ancestors were marking the passage of seasons and lives. An archaeologist might find, in the grave of a child from a Neolithic village, a small, carefully carved toy, a tiny clay animal or a stone doll. This object is more than a sentimental token. It is a fossilized moment of societal timekeeping. It speaks of a culture that recognized childhood as a distinct phase, a season of life with its own tools and rituals. The great celestial clocks, the solstices, the phases of the moon, were mirrored in smaller human-scale rituals. A coming-of-age ceremony, performed at a specific age, was a way of placing a child firmly on the timeline of the community. It was a collective announcement. You are here. You have moved from this point to that. These rituals were the stories a tribe told itself about time, stories that were passed down not through lectures, but through participation. The child, by taking part in the annual harvest festival or the seasonal migration, was absorbing the rhythm of their world, learning to feel time not as an abstract concept, but as the very pulse of their existence. Did these ancient rhythms, etched into bone and tradition, create a more organic, more deeply felt understanding of time's passage than our modern, digitized seconds and minutes? In our modern world, the teaching of time has become a formal, necessary curriculum. A child's day is segmented into blocks: school time, playtime, bedtime. They learn to name the days of the week in a sing-song chant, to recognize the shape of numbers on a calendar, to understand that a year is a cycle of holidays and birthdays. This is the scaffolding upon which a shared social reality is built. Without it, the complex coordination of a classroom, a city, a nation would be impossible. The repetitive nature of these lessons, the same calendar reviewed every morning, the same schedule followed each school day, carves neural pathways, training the young brain to anticipate, to plan, to locate itself within the predictable flow of a structured society. This is a crucial adaptation, the cognitive equivalent of learning to walk. But in this necessary process of socialization, a subtle shift occurs. Time, which once was felt as the slow turning of seasons or the rhythm of communal life, becomes a grid. It becomes a commodity to be managed, a resource to be spent or wasted. The child learns to watch the clock, to hurry, to wait. They are learning to live in a world of schedules, but are they, in the process, forgetting how to live within time itself? This leads to a quiet, unsettling paradox. If time is ultimately a human construct, a magnificent and complex story we tell ourselves to make sense of entropy and change, then what does a child truly understand? Have they grasped the essence of time, or have they simply, and with great skill, learned to obey its external symbols? The long, seemingly aimless afternoons of childhood, where an hour could stretch into what felt like a lifetime, are not merely periods of undeveloped cognition. They are, perhaps, a different way of being. In that stretched-out hour, a child building a fort or watching an ant trail is not ignoring time. They are submerged in it. They are experiencing a duration unmeasured by clocks, a pure, subjective flow. So, does a prolonged childhood, free from the urgent pressure of deadlines, actually offer a more authentic, more profound relationship with time? Does it allow for a deeper immersion in the present moment, a state that adults often spend a lifetime trying to recapture through meditation or art? The moment a child truly internalizes the calendar, when they can count down the days to their birthday with genuine anticipation, is a milestone of monumental significance. It is the dawn of a new consciousness. But this awakening carries a shadow. To understand that birthdays come in a sequence is to understand, however dimly, that the number of them is finite. The realization that I am 6 and soon I will be 7 contains the first faint whisper of a much larger truth, that childhood itself will not last forever. This is the bittersweet price of this new awareness. With the linear arrow of time now firmly planted in their mind, another profound construct begins to take shape: the self. A continuous narrative of me requires a past, a present, and a future. The I who was 5 is not entirely the same as the I who is 6, and this subtle distinction is the foundation of personal identity. The child begins to craft their story, a story that is inextricably woven into the fabric of time. But what happens when this natural, gradual awakening is accelerated, when the gentle rhythm of childhood is replaced by the frantic tempo of the modern world? If the formation of a temporal self is a delicate evolutionary process, what are we to make of the systems, the hyper-competitive education, the omnipresent digital screens, the curated pressures of social media, that seem intent on forcing this consciousness to mature at a breakneck pace? Are we, in our quest to prepare children for the future, inadvertently robbing them of the very temporal soil in which a resilient and authentic self can grow? When does a child first learn to say I? It is not a word that arrives with the first breath or even the first step. It emerges later, a quiet, seismic shift in the architecture of a mind. For months, the child has been a collection of sensations: hunger, warmth, the comfort of a familiar face. They are a part of the world, woven into it like a thread in a tapestry. Then, one day, a finger points to a tiny chest. A voice, still clumsy with newness, declares, "Me," or perhaps, "mine." In that simple syllable, a universe is born, a line is drawn, faint but indelible, between the self and everything else. But is this I a sudden discovery, like a light switched on in a dark room? Or is it something far more ancient and gradual, a seed planted deep within our biology that requires the specific, slow-burning heat of childhood to finally break open? The journey toward self-awareness begins not with a thought, but with a reflection. In the quiet laboratories of developmental psychology, a simple test reveals a profound truth. A smudge of red rouge is placed, unnoticed, on a toddler's nose. The child is then seated before a mirror. Before the age of 18 months, the reaction is one of curiosity or even social engagement. A charming baby peers back, a potential playmate. But somewhere between 18 and 24 months, a cognitive leap occurs. The child touches their own nose, not the mirror. They have connected the image in the glass with the feeling of their own body. They have passed the mirror test, joining a surprisingly small club in the animal kingdom that includes dolphins, elephants, and the great apes. This is not yet the philosophical I, but its fundamental bedrock, the realization that this body is my body. It is the first, crucial layer of a self-portrait that will take a lifetime to complete. Why does this recognition arrive so late in our development, long after we have learned to walk and utter our first words? Could it be that nature, in its infinite wisdom, understands that to be aware of oneself is a burden as much as a gift, and thus delays it until we are strong enough to bear its weight? This dawning sense of a separate physical self finds a distant echo in the deepest corridors of our past. Long before mirrors, our ancestors left traces of their own awakening identities on cold cave walls. A hand, pressed against stone and sprayed with pigment, creates a negative silhouette, a permanent statement of, "I was here." These are not just art, they are signatures. Similarly, the small carved figurines found at archaeological sites, with their exaggerated features, suggest a growing capacity for self-representation, for seeing one's own form reflected back in an object. In every culture, childhood is a time for this gentle individuation. A child is given a name, a special blanket, a toy that is uniquely theirs. They are encouraged to see themselves as a distinct entity within a family, a tribe. They try on roles like costumes, the hunter, the caregiver, the leader. Through play, they are not just learning social rules, they are practicing the very act of being a self, experimenting with the boundaries of their own emerging identity. The I is not merely discovered, it is sculpted layer by layer, through interaction and imitation. What does it mean that our earliest expressions of self are so often physical, so tied to the body and its mark upon the world? Is the body the first and most fundamental home of the self? In the modern world, this process of self-construction has become more explicit, more complex, and infinitely more demanding. A child's elongated childhood, a biological peculiarity of our species, acts as a protected workshop for the forging of the self. It is no longer enough to know, "This is my body." The child must now learn to answer the question, "Who am I?" This question is answered not in a cave, but in a classroom, on a playground, and increasingly, on a screen. The self is nurtured through choices, what to wear, what to like, who to befriend. It is shaped by responsibilities, by the slow dawning of consequences. Emotions, once simple storms of feeling, become labeled and analyzed. I am not just angry, I am jealous. This is not just sadness, it is loneliness. The cognitive and emotional dimensions of the self intertwine, creating a rich, often confusing, inner landscape. This is where the simple self-awareness of the mirror test blossoms into full-blown consciousness, complete with the capacity for introspection, imagination, and, crucially, anxiety. For to be aware of oneself is to be aware of one's own vulnerability, one's place in the opinions of others, one's own fleeting existence. If the first I was a physical claim, is the modern I a story we constantly tell and retell, a narrative desperately seeking a coherent plot? This slow-cooked emergence of the self presents a fascinating paradox. If the I is the very foundation of human consciousness, the seat of our greatest achievements in art, science, and love, why is its arrival so delayed? Evolution rarely wastes energy on frivolous timing. Perhaps the slowness is the point. The I is a powerful, volatile tool. To be granted it too early, before the brain has built the neural pathways for empathy, for logic, for emotional regulation, would be like giving a child a key to a weapons vault. The protracted journey of childhood allows for the I to be tempered, to be socialized. It is not just about learning who you are, but learning how to be a you among other yous. The slow burn of development may be nature's way of ensuring that the flame of selfhood does not consume us, but instead illuminates the path toward connection. Could it be that our humanity depends not on the moment we recognize ourselves, but on the long, careful apprenticeship that follows? So, the I does not simply appear. It is conjured. It is simmered in the crucible of childhood, a slow alchemy of biology, relationship, and experience. From that first recognition in the mirror, to the intricate tapestry of personal history and aspiration, the self is a work in progress, a story whose first chapter is written in the language of sensation, and the final page is never truly reached. And with this hard-won consciousness, the child gains the world of dreams and imagination, but also inherits its shadows. They do not just live. They begin to remember the past and fear the future. They begin to weave a story about who they are, a story that can empower or imprison. This fragile, constructed self, born in the long twilight of childhood, now must face a world it did not make. What happens when a self forged in the slow, relational time of human evolution is suddenly plunged into the blinding, fractured light of the digital age? Does the ancient cradle of the brain possess the resilience to protect its newest, most precious creation? The child is playing on the floor, lost in a world of blocks and stuffed animals. The sun slants through the window, dust motes dancing in the warm light. It is a scene of perfect, unthinking immersion. Then, a pause. The small hands grow still. The child looks up, not at a toy, but at the mother, and a question forms, born not from the immediate world of color and shape, but from a new internal landscape. Will you die, Mommy? In that moment, something profound shifts. The seamless present tense of childhood cracks open, and a sliver of a future of absence, slips through. This is not a question about death, not really. It is the first faint tremor of a seismic human capacity, the ability to hold in mind what is not there. It is the birth of anxiety. Why does a mind, once content with the here and now, begin to conjure shadows of what might be? The journey into this unease begins deep within the architecture of the developing brain. For the first few years of life, the human child operates primarily from the ancient emotional core of the brain, the limbic system. This is the realm of the immediate: hunger, fear, joy, comfort. It is a world of stark, present-tense realities. But quietly, inexorably, another region is coming online: the prefrontal cortex. This intricate tapestry of neural connections, sitting just behind the forehead, is the seat of executive function. It is the planner, the predictor, the simulator of scenarios. Its maturation is what allows a child to move from simply reacting to the world to beginning to model it internally. This newfound ability to run mental simulations is our greatest evolutionary advantage, the engine of our civilization. It allows us to plan for winter, to build shelters, to cooperate. But this gift has attacks. As the neural pathways between the limbic system, the wellspring of emotion, and the prefrontal cortex, the projector of possibilities, strengthen, a powerful and often fraught collaboration begins. The emotional brain, with its primal alarms for danger, now has a partner that can feed it an endless stream of potential dangers. The child is no longer just afraid of the loud noise. The developing cortex allows them to imagine the monster that might make the noise, hiding in the dark of a future night. Anxiety, then, is not a malfunction. It is the inevitable byproduct of an imaginative mind learning to project itself forward in time. It is the hum of the engine that also powers curiosity and foresight. What is the cost of building a time machine in your own head? Long before neuroscience could map these internal landscapes, our ancestors recognized this pivotal transition in a child's life. They saw the dawning awareness of mortality, of risk, of loss, and they built containers for it. Across cultures, archaeological and historical records are rich with rituals, symbols, and stories that seem designed to guide the young psyche through this awakening. These were not merely superstitions. They were a form of collective emotional education. Consider the initiation rites found in countless indigenous cultures. A young person is taken from the comfort of the village, subjected to symbolic trials, and often confronted with imagery of death and rebirth. These rituals were brutal, perhaps, but they served a profound purpose: to introduce the terrifying concepts of mortality and sacrifice within a controlled, sacred narrative. The anxiety was not suppressed. It was channeled, given meaning, and integrated into the individual's identity as a member of the tribe. Similarly, folklore and fairy tales are rarely the sanitized, cheerful stories we often mistake them for. The original tales are dark forests filled with wolves that talk, witches that hunger for children, and perilous journeys. They are rehearsals. In the safety of a fireside telling, a child can experience the fear of being lost, the threat of a predator, the anguish of separation. They can practice courage and resilience through the hero's journey. The religious narratives that shaped civilizations, too, are deeply preoccupied with explaining suffering, appeasing unpredictable forces, and offering a path beyond the grave. These structures provided a cosmology that made sense of the random cruelties of existence, answering the child's unformed dread with a story, however frightening, that promised some form of order. Did these ancient vessels for anxiety, for all their starkness, offer a sturdier framework for a questioning mind than our modern attempts to sanitize fear away? In our contemporary world, the sources of a child's anxiety have shifted, but the underlying mechanism remains unchanged. The modern child may not fear forest spirits, but they grapple with a different set of phantoms, often projected onto a screen or whispered in schoolyards. They worry about grades, a metric that predicts their future social and economic standing. They feel the subtle and not so subtle social anxieties of friendship groups, the complex dynamics of inclusion and exclusion that mirror adult tribal politics, and increasingly they are burdened with existential threats their ancestors could never have conceived: climate change, global pandemics, the specter of war. These are not irrational fears. They are, if anything, hyper-rational. They are the products of a highly developed prefrontal cortex absorbing complex, systemic information and projecting a frighteningly plausible future. To pathologize this anxiety as a mere disorder is to miss the point entirely. The child who lies awake worrying about a test is exercising the same cognitive muscles as the early human who stayed alert to the possibility of a predator. The child who feels distress about a melting glacier is demonstrating a remarkable capacity for empathy and long-term thinking. Their anxiety is a testament to their ability to connect cause and effect across vast scales of time and space. It is the shadow cast by the light of their dawning consciousness. So, when we seek to medicate or simply soothe away this discomfort, are we treating a disease, or are we silencing the early warning system of a mind that is, quite rightly, concerned with the world it is inheriting? This leads to a paradoxical question about the very structure of modern childhood. We speak of an extended childhood as a gift, a protected space for growth and learning. But is it also a cage? The slow maturation of the human brain, this long period of neural plasticity, is what allows for deep learning and cultural transmission. Yet, during this same period, the capacity for anxiety blooms. The child is biologically primed for movement, for sensory exploration, for learning through direct interaction with a physical world. Their brain is a dynamic system craving real-time feedback. But our societal response to their growing cognitive complexity, their becoming human, is to increasingly restrict that very physicality. We give them more to think about, and less space to think it through with their bodies. Is the long human childhood a benevolent sanctuary? Or is it a prolonged state of tension between a brain built for action and a culture that demands stillness? The emergence of anxiety is the toll paid for consciousness itself. It is the receipt for our ability to remember the past and imagine the future, to love deeply, and therefore to fear loss profoundly. That first question about a parent's mortality is not a sign of pathology. It is a milestone of cognitive awakening. It is the moment a child ceases to be a mere creature of instinct and begins the arduous, glorious journey into a thinking, worrying, hoping human being. And it is at this precise juncture, as the internal world of possibility and peril expands, that society steps in with its most defining and universal institution. The child, now burdened with the knowledge of what could be, is ushered into a room with chairs and desks, their gaze directed from the vast horizon of their imagination to the fixed symbols on a page. The world of potential futures is exchanged for the curriculum of the present. The free-ranging exploration of the mind is gently, firmly, channeled into rows. And so we place them in school. But what happens to a brain designed for movement when it is told for the first time to be still? Imagine a world where a 7-year-old's hands, small but capable, are not wrapped around a pencil but around the handle of a tool, or perhaps steadying a bow. Their day is not measured by the ringing of bells, but by the sun's arc, their curriculum written in the tracks of animals and the cycles of crops. For most of human history, childhood was a brief, intense apprenticeship for life. By 7, you were no longer just a child. You were a contributor, a learner in the most visceral sense. Today, a 7-year-old is in the 2nd grade. Their world is one of desks, worksheets, and scheduled playtimes. We have, with deliberate and collective intention, engineered an institution that stretches the period of childhood across years, creating a prolonged artificial space between infancy and adulthood, the school. Why has humanity chosen to encase its youth in this extended, curated holding pattern? The answer may begin not in the classroom, but within the intricate, unfolding landscape of the human brain. Neuroscience reveals that our biological clock for maturity is uniquely slow. Unlike other mammals whose brains mature rapidly, the human brain continues to weave its complex tapestry of neural connections well into our mid-20s. This is especially true for the prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function, the place where abstract thought is forged, where moral reasoning takes root, and where the turbulent seas of emotion are meant to be navigated. This prolonged neurological plasticity is not a design flaw. It is an evolutionary masterpiece. It grants us an unparalleled capacity for learning, culture, and adaptation. The school, then, can be seen as a cultural invention perfectly tailored to this biological reality. It provides a structured, information-rich environment designed to capitalize on this extended window of neural days. It is a greenhouse for the mind, protecting the slow-growing sapling of human intelligence, allowing it to develop complex branches that a hastier existence might never permit. But does this nurturing environment shape the tree to its natural form, or to one that best suits the shape of the greenhouse itself? To understand this shaping, we must step back into the dawn of civilization, when the very idea of school first stirred. The archaeological record suggests that formal education emerged not in hunter-gatherer bands, but alongside the rise of agriculture and the first urban settlements. As society grew more complex, the knowledge required to thrive exploded beyond the immediate skills of hunting or gathering. Surplus food allowed for specialization. Scribes, priests, artisans, and their knowledge became a new form of currency. Suddenly, a child's economic value shifted from immediate labor to potential expertise. Childhood was, in a sense, postponed. The child was pulled back from the fields and workshops and placed in a new space, a space of deliberate instruction. This was a monumental trade-off. The loss of a child's short-term contribution for the promise of their long-term capability. The school became the cradle of civilization, but also the place where the direct, sensory education of nature was exchanged for the symbolic, abstract education of culture. Was this the point where childhood began to be separated from the raw texture of life? In our modern world, this function of the school has expanded far beyond the transmission of academic knowledge. It has become a comprehensive social apparatus for the management of youth. Modern education is not merely about reading and arithmetic. It is a vast, controlled simulation of society. It teaches children how to cue, how to follow a schedule, how to interact with peers under the watchful eye of an authority figure. It is a system designed to delay adult responsibilities, financial independence, marriage, parenthood, for over a decade. By doing so, it aims to protect children from the premature pressures of the real world, offering a sheltered space to make mistakes and develop identity. The school acts as a societal buffer, stretching the period of dependency to prepare the young for a world of dizzying complexity. It is a prolonged rehearsal for a performance that grows more demanding with each generation. But in this endless rehearsal, are we protecting the actors or merely keeping them off the main stage? This leads to a necessary, uncomfortable counterpoint. Does this extended sanctuary truly protect, or does it simply incarcerate? The very walls that shield a child from hardship can also become the bars of a cage, delaying the development of genuine resilience. The playground, with its rubberized flooring and regulated games, is a far cry from the unsupervised exploration of a forest or a city street. The constant supervision, the pre-digested knowledge, the lack of real-world consequence, does this cultivate capability or a prolonged state of learned helplessness? Is a childhood spent predominantly indoors, navigating the social hierarchies of the cafeteria and the strictures of the curriculum, a richer experience than one spent working alongside family, contributing to a tangible household need? We have replaced the immediate, often harsh lessons of necessity with the abstract, mediated lessons of instruction. We have traded the genuine responsibility of watching a younger sibling for the simulated responsibility of a group project. Has the artificial extension of childhood, for all its good intentions, created a generation that is educated for adulthood but inexperienced in life? The school stands as a profound paradox, a human invention that mirrors our own biological paradox of a long, vulnerable maturation. It is both a cradle of potential and a club of conformity, a sanctuary from the world and a suspension from it. We have constructed this elaborate stage to give our children the best possible start, yet we cannot help but wonder if the performance we are scripting is an authentic one. If the school is the primary engine for the socialization of childhood, then it forces us to confront a deeper, more unsettling question. Have we, in our quest to perfect the journey to adulthood, created a generation living in a prolonged state of simulation where the very meaning of growing up is being systematically delayed, not by nature, but by design? And as we ponder this artificial garden we've built for our youth, we must now turn to the forces that have commercialized its very soil. For if the school extends childhood, what happens when that extended childhood becomes a marketplace, and the child, from its first breath, becomes its primary consumer? The legal age of adulthood is a line drawn in the sand, a clear, administrative mark at 18. Yet if you stand at that line and look across, the landscape on the other side has become strangely blurred. A 25-year-old, by all accounts a legal adult, might still be living in their childhood bedroom, their life a mosaic of advanced degrees, internships, and a social world curated through a screen, yet distinctly separate from the traditional milestones of full independence. This is not an anomaly, but a growing norm. It raises a quiet, persistent question that hums beneath the surface of modern life. Are we extending childhood? Or are we, in fact, postponing adulthood? Has the very essence of growing up been stretched and distorted, becoming a prolonged twilight zone between dependency and responsibility? Biologically, we possess a map of human development. We know the brain, that intricate universe within our skulls, achieves its final structural maturation around the age of 25. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of judgment, impulse control, and long-term planning, is the last frontier to be fully settled. This is a fact, a hard-won piece of scientific knowledge. Yet, this biological timeline exists in a curious tension with the social clock that once ticked so predictably. For previous generations, the completion of high school often coincided with a job, a marriage, a mortgage, a swift and seemingly natural transition into the roles of provider and parent. The brain, by today's understanding, was still under construction, yet society handed it the blueprints for a life and expected it to build. It was a demand for functional maturity, a readiness forged not by the finality of neural pathways, but by the immediate necessities of survival and social expectation. The body and mind were deemed capable because they had to be. So if the hardware of the human brain has not significantly changed in a few generations, what has shifted so dramatically in the software of our society that the same biological entity is now considered unready for the very tasks it once shouldered with competence? To find an answer, we must journey back, far beyond the Industrial Revolution, to the cradle of our species. In hunter-gatherer societies, the concept of a prolonged adolescence would have been an unaffordable luxury, a vulnerability the group could not bear. A child of 10 or 12 was not merely playing at adulthood. They were integral to its practice. They learned to track, to forage, to craft tools not through simulated exercises, but by participating in the life and death drama of daily existence. The transition was not marked by a birthday or a graduation ceremony, but by a demonstrated competence. There was no sharp, clean line between child and adult. Instead, there was a gradual, seamless integration into the complex social and economic fabric of the community. The teenager, as a distinct sociological category, is a startlingly recent invention, a product of 20th century prosperity and compulsory education. This historical perspective reveals a profound truth. The rigid, clearly defined stages of life we take for granted are not a biological mandate, but a social construct, a story we have written and can, it seems, rewrite. Does our modern elongation of childhood, then, represent a hard-won victory, a space for protection and learning? Or does it create a new kind of limbo, a waiting room for a life that is increasingly difficult to enter? The architecture of contemporary society seems designed for this postponement. The path to a stable career is no longer a short sprint, but a marathon of higher education, unpaid internships, and precarious entry-level positions. The economic threshold for independence, the ability to afford a home, to support a family, has receded into the distance, a mirage for many. In this landscape, the family home becomes not a place to leave, but a base camp for increasingly long and arduous expeditions into a competitive world. Psychologically, this fosters a state of suspended animation. These are individuals who are chronologically adults, brimming with knowledge and technological savvy, yet often shielded from the raw, unforgiving weight of full responsibility. They inhabit a paradoxical space, old enough to navigate the complexities of a global digital culture, but not always required to master the fundamental, tangible skills of sustaining their own household. They are, in a sense, both ancient and infantile, possessing the wisdom of the internet age while potentially lacking the grounded resilience of their grandparents. Is this extended period of semi-dependency a necessary incubation for a more complex world? Or does it risk creating a generation that is over-prepared for tests and under-prepared for life? One could argue that this extended childhood is a form of progress, a societal evolution we should celebrate. It allows for more education, more self-discovery, more protection from the harsh realities that once forced children into adult roles prematurely. It is a testament to our wealth and our desire to give the next generation a better, safer start. But every evolution carries a shadow. The counter-argument whispers of a subtle decline, a collective failure to launch that creates what some call adultescence, perpetual juveniles who have mastered the art of consumption but hesitate at the brink of contribution. The safety net of the parental home, while well-intentioned, can sometimes become a gilded cage, inhibiting the very failures and struggles that forge a resilient and independent self. Are we protecting our young, or are we inadvertently stunting their growth by removing the very pressures that force adaptation and maturity? Is a long childhood a gift of time, or a subtle form of captivity? When the boundary between childhood and adulthood becomes as blurred as it is today, we are forced to re-examine the fundamental purpose of this uniquely long period of human dependence. From an evolutionary standpoint, our extended childhood is not a flaw, but a feature. It is the cradle of our success, the protected space where our large, complex brains have the time to learn language, culture, and social nuance, the tools that allowed us to dominate the planet. Its biological purpose is learning how to survive and thrive. But the question for our age is, what are we learning to survive? The lessons of a prolonged modern childhood seem increasingly abstract, focused on academic achievement and digital literacy, while the visceral lessons of self-reliance, of building your own nest, of providing for your own needs, are delayed. The childhood was meant to be a preparation for life, not a substitute for it. And so, as the sands of this transition continue to shift, we are left with a tentative observation, a single slice of a much larger truth. Perhaps the issue is not the length of childhood, but its content. The challenge is not to rush the journey, but to ensure that the path, however long, still leads toward a destination of genuine capability and resilience. The human animal is defined by its incredible ability to adapt. We adapted to plains, to ice ages, to agriculture, and to industry. Now, we are adapting to an information age that has reshaped the very timeline of a human life. The extended adolescence may be our latest adaptation, a response to a world that demands more knowledge and offers less stability. But does this adaptation come at the cost of a deeper, more primal wisdom? And if we have successfully stretched the boundaries of youth, what, then, have we compressed on the other side? What becomes of true adulthood when its arrival is perpetually delayed? This leads us to the very heart of the matter, to the quiet, intimate space where this prolonged childhood is shaped and molded. For if we are collectively deciding to extend this period of learning and dependence, then we must confront the methods we use to fill it. We must ask, in our well-intentioned efforts to give our children every advantage, in our carefully curated curriculums and our obsession with early optimization, are we truly educating them, or are we simply programming them for a future we imagine but cannot truly predict?